Russell's paradox. We begin with one of the most important paradoxes in all of logic. Russell's paradox. Now, think of something simple, a list. You make them every day. Things to buy, things to do, people to invite. A list feels tidy. You control what goes on it. You decide what it includes. But what if you try to make a list of all lists that don't include themselves? It sounds harmless, but the moment you ask whether this new list should include itself, things start to slip. If it does include itself, then it doesn't belong, because it should only contain lists that don't include themselves. But if it doesn't include itself, then it does belong, because it fits the rule. It should be on the list. Both answers cancel each other out. You're not in a riddle, you're in a paradox. One that exposes a problem not just in how we organize things, but in how we think. Here's something closer to real life. Picture a small town where a man cuts the hair of every person who doesn't cut their own. Now ask, does he cut his own hair? If he does, then he's not supposed to, because he only cuts the hair of those who don't. But if he doesn't cut his own hair, then he should, because he cuts the hair of those who don't cut theirs. There's no answer that works. The problem isn't the barber. It's the way the rule defines itself. It traps itself in a loop it can't get out of. This isn't just wordplay. It points to something deep. We build systems. We make categories, define rules, draw circles around things. It helps us feel like the world is in order. But sometimes, when a rule tries to apply to itself, the whole system breaks. That's what this paradox reveals. When people first discovered this, it was more than a clever brain teaser. It was a flaw in the very logic people used to structure knowledge. To solve it, new systems had to be built, ones that carefully avoided this kind of self-reference. Rules were rewritten. Some ideas were thrown out completely. But even without the math, this paradox teaches something quiet and lasting. It reminds us that not everything can be boxed up. Not every rule fits its own shape. Sometimes clarity becomes confusion when it looks at itself too closely. And in that space between the clean line and the blurred edge, the mind begins to slow. There's no pressure to solve it, no urgency to untangle it. Just a soft reminder that even logic, in all its certainty, has places where it folds in on itself and rests. And that's where we'll rest too. Grelling-Nelson paradox. Some words describe things, others describe how those things behave. But there are rare words that end up describing themselves. Take the word short, it's short. The word polysyllabic has many syllables. These aren't just words doing their job, they're examples of a strange kind of symmetry. A mirror, where the word fits its own meaning. This is where the Grelling-Nelson paradox begins, quietly with definitions, and then it unravels everything. Words, for the most part, can be placed into two types, the ones that do describe themselves and the ones that don't. We call the first group autological. These are words like noun, which is a noun, or English, which is written in English. Word is a word. Unhyphenated is, conveniently, not hyphenated. Then there are the other words, the ones that don't describe themselves. These are called heterological. Think of long, which is not a long word, or monosyllabic, which has more than one syllable. These words don't fit their own meaning. Now, here comes the twist. Is the word heterological? Heterological? If it is, then by definition, it does not describe itself. But wait, that's exactly what a heterological word is supposed to do. But if heterological does not describe itself, then that would make it autological. And if it's autological, then it must describe itself, which means it's not heterological. It's a quiet loop. Just a single word, turning its meaning in on itself without any way out. No answer works without breaking the definition. This is the Grelling-Nelson paradox. It looks simple, just a game with adjectives, but it gently unravels how language operates. It shows that even the words we use to define things can stumble when they start defining themselves. The effect is subtle but unsettling. It's not that the logic is wrong, it's that the structure of meaning bends inward. The paradox appears only when we treat a word as both the tool and the thing being examined. To ground this in something familiar, think of a label maker. You print a label that says label. You stick it on the machine itself, it fits. That's autological. Now print one that says unreadable, and the letters are perfectly clear. That label doesn't fit its own description. That's heterological. But then print a label that says heterological and ask, does it belong on itself? You hold it in your hand, and your brain doesn't twist into confusion, but your sense of certainty does. Because the problem isn't the label, it's the question. The moment a word is forced to look at itself, not through meaning but through definition, logic falters. Language isn't built to carry that kind of weight. We use words to explain, to categorize, to contain, but some words, like mirrors facing each other, fall into an endless loop. Reflection after reflection. The clarity vanishes, and all that's left is the echo of structure with no floor beneath it. The Grelling-Nelson paradox doesn't need numbers or symbols. It doesn't need philosophy or physics. It only needs a question that turns back on itself. Is the word heterological heterological? You'll answer it once, then again, then again. And each time you land where you started. There's no trap, no trick. Just a gentle reminder that some systems, especially the ones we build with language, have doors that open into their own hallway with no end. And as you follow that hallway, the need to reach a destination fades. The words lose urgency. The thoughts grow soft. The question continues to turn, without asking to be answered. And that's enough for now. Thank you for still watching this video. Pause just for a second and subscribe to this channel. Now, let's continue. Curry's paradox. There's a kind of logic that feels almost magical, like pulling a conclusion out of thin air, and not just any conclusion, but any conclusion you want. That's where Curry's paradox lives. This one doesn't disguise itself in language or clever wordplay. It plays by the rules, our rules, pure logic, using nothing but if and then. No illusions, no trick phrasing. And yet, it unlocks something that shouldn't be possible, the ability to prove anything at all. It begins with a statement. Plain, quiet, unassuming. If this statement is true, then you win $1 million. Now, pause. It's just a conditional. A simple if-then. But what makes this different is that the statement refers to itself. It says, if I'm true, then something else must be true. And here's the twist. Because if the statement is true, then the then part must happen. That means you win $1 million. But if it's not true, then what happens? This is where things break. Because logically, the way conditionals work, if the first part is true, then the second part must be true. If we accept the first part, the rest comes with it. But what if we didn't earn the $1 million? There's no proof, no work, no cause, just a trick of self-reference. Let's ground it in something closer to home. A note sits on a table. It reads, if this note is true, then the fridge is empty. Now, nothing about the fridge has changed. The note didn't create hunger. It didn't open a door. It didn't move anything. But if the logic in the note is sound, and if you accept the statement, it leads you to believe that the fridge is empty simply because the note says so. This is what makes Curry's paradox unsettling. It doesn't collapse like Russell's. It doesn't spin endlessly like Grelling Nelson. It stands firm, formal, logical, and still, it lets you leap to any result you like. If this statement is true, then 2 plus 2 equals 5. If this statement is true, then I am king of the world. If you accept the structure and allow it to be self-referential, then there's no stopping what you can prove. The problem lies not in the logic, but in how logic behaves when turned inward. Self-reference alone isn't dangerous, but when it's paired with conditionals, it acts like a key to a locked door that was never supposed to open. In real life, this doesn't cause chaos on a daily basis. Our brains are wired to ignore these loops. We don't walk around writing conditionals that reference themselves, but in formal systems, in mathematics, in logic, in computer science, Curry's paradox exposes something deeply important. It tells us there are sentences that seem valid, that look perfect, but when examined closely, allow contradictions to sneak through the back door. It reminds us that truth isn't always a matter of correctness. It's sometimes a matter of structure. The paradox was uncovered not to entertain, but to warn. That in certain systems, especially ones built on unrestricted rules, truth can be bent into saying whatever you want. That's not logic. That's illusion dressed as reason. The danger isn't loud, it doesn't break things visibly. It allows everything to look neat until you realize the foundation is hollow. So why think about it here? Because Curry's paradox doesn't ask you to fix it. It just lets you notice the softness under what once seemed solid. That even logic, in its cleanest form, can drift into illusion if it's not handled gently. And in that drifting, something else happens. The need to be right loosens its grip. You no longer chase the answer. You just watch the pieces settle. A conditional, a reflection, a quiet collapse that doesn't make a sound. And with that silence, the mind relaxes. Berry paradox. There are some paradoxes that twist time. Others bend meaning. But the Berry paradox does something simpler and more surprising. It plays with numbers. Just numbers. And yet it proves that even counting, something we rely on like breathing, can quietly contradict itself. Start with a sentence. The smallest number not nameable in under 20 words. Now think about what that sentence is doing. It's trying to describe a number. Not just any number, but the smallest one that you can't describe in fewer than 20 words. But here's the problem. That sentence just described it in 13 words. So, if a number can't be named in fewer than 20 words, but you've just named it in 13, something's wrong. Either the number doesn't exist, or the sentence is cheating. But the sentence isn't a trick. It's perfectly clear. This is the Berry paradox. It comes from a simple idea, that you can use language to point to numbers. You don't need to write 8,042. You can say the square of 91. You can say the number of days in a leap year. Language can define numbers indirectly, efficiently. But when you try to stretch that power too far, when you try to name the unnameable, you find yourself in a trap. Let's simplify it even further. Suppose you have a rule. No number can be named unless it takes at least 20 words. So, you make a list. You go through all the numbers and eliminate the ones that can be described with shorter phrases. Then you ask, what's the first number that's missing? The one that couldn't be named in fewer than 20 words? You point to it proudly and say, the smallest number not nameable in fewer than 20 words. But now, you've done exactly what you claimed was impossible. You named it. and you used fewer than 20 words to do it. The Berry paradox doesn't live in math. It lives in the relationship between language and limits. It's about how we use descriptions, shortcuts, and reference to shrink down large ideas. And how, when we treat language like a machine, it sometimes spins out results that don't make sense. This has real-world echoes. Think of naming things in tech. If a programmer says, "The first function you can't describe in 10 lines of code," but then describes it in 8, the paradox arises again. Or in literature, the shortest story never told. What happens when it's told just by describing its absence? It's like standing in a room full of mirrors and pointing to the one reflection that claims to show nothing. The moment you identify it, it stops being invisible. The core of the Berry paradox is this. When a description tries to define something based on its own undefinability, it erases the very barrier it created. You try to name what can't be named, and in doing so, you name it. It doesn't break reality, it doesn't cause alarms, but it quietly reminds us that language has limits. Even when we think we're being precise, sometimes the act of description changes the very thing we're trying to describe. It's like reaching for a shadow. The moment you think you've caught it, it shifts. But there's a comfort in that too, in knowing that not everything has to resolve. That sometimes the act of thinking through the contradiction is more soothing than trying to fix it. And as the contradiction loops quietly through your thoughts, without urgency, without pressure, your mind can start to drift. Not into confusion, but into stillness. Because some puzzles aren't there to be solved. They're there to be set down gently, like a stone by the shore, where the waves will smooth it over time. Epimenides. Paradox. Some paradoxes feel like mazes, others feel like mirrors. The Epimenides paradox is more like a whisper that turns back on itself. It begins with a simple sentence spoken long ago. All Cretans are liars. The man who said it was a Cretan. Now, pause. If he's telling the truth, then all Cretans lie. But he's a Cretan, that means he's lying. So if he's lying, then not all Cretans are liars, which means he might be telling the truth. And the loop begins. It doesn't go in circles loudly. It just sits there, quietly refusing to settle. This is the Epimenides paradox, one of the oldest self-referential problems in recorded thought. It lives in the structure of language, not in complexity. A sentence that talks about the truthfulness of the speaker, while including the speaker within that very claim. It's the ancestor of the liar paradox, the more famous version. This sentence is false. But the Epimenides form is different. It's not just about self-reference, it's about identity, belonging, and the trust we place in a voice when it speaks about its own group. Let's bring it closer to everyday life. A student says, "All students in this school are dishonest," but the student is part of the school. If the statement is true, the student is dishonest, which makes the statement questionable. But if it's false, then not all students are dishonest. So maybe the student is honest, and the statement is somehow true again. It's the kind of logic that sways under its own weight. We hear these loops more than we realize. A politician says, "No politicians can be trusted." A reviewer writes, "All online reviews are unreliable." A teacher claims, "Teachers don't always tell the truth." Each time, the statement tries to step outside its own boundaries, only to find itself pulled back in. And the deeper effect isn't frustration, it's awareness. We realize that some declarations can't stand alone. They fold back, like origami, into the hands that made them. The speaker tries to define a group, but their inclusion in that group unravels the certainty. The Epimenides paradox teaches us that truth isn't always about the words used. It's about the position from which they're spoken. A claim, on its own, can seem clear, but once the speaker becomes part of the claim, the clarity fades. It's like trying to jump out of your own shadow. And yet, there's a softness in this kind of paradox. It doesn't ask you to solve it. It doesn't demand logic to win. It just invites you to sit with the discomfort of knowing that some statements, especially the ones that talk about themselves, may never land on firm ground. It shows that truth isn't just about the statement. It's about the frame, the speaker, the context, the trust. All of it woven together in a way that resists being pulled apart. And the beauty of that resistance is that it quiets the mind, not with confusion, but with stillness. Because when words fold back on themselves, there's nothing left to chase. And that's when the thinking slows. The body softens, and the thoughts fade gently into rest. Pinocchio paradox. Some paradoxes are born in ancient texts. Others hide in philosophy, law, or mathematics. But this one comes from a wooden boy with a growing nose. The Pinocchio paradox is deceptively playful. It sounds like something a child might stumble into while daydreaming. But it carries all the weight of logical contradiction, wrapped in a fairy tale. It begins with one sentence: "My nose will grow now." That's it. Just those 5 words. But the moment he says it, the ground starts to shake. If Pinocchio's nose grows, that means he was lying, but he said it would grow. So if it does, then he told the truth, which means it shouldn't grow. But if it doesn't grow, then he was lying, so it should grow. Each path cancels the other. The sentence can't be true without also being false, and it can't be false without also being true. That's the Pinocchio paradox. It lives in a narrow space between prediction and truth. But what makes it powerful is that it's not the classic liar paradox. The sentence doesn't say, "I'm lying." It doesn't claim to be false. Instead, it makes a prediction about something that only happens when Pinocchio lies. The logic turns on the nose. If the statement is true, his nose should grow, but then he wasn't lying, and his nose only grows when he lies, so it shouldn't grow. But if the statement is false, then he was lying, and when he lies, his nose does grow, which would mean he wasn't lying. The contradiction isn't in the sentence itself, it's in how the world of Pinocchio responds to truth and lies. Now, stretch this a little further. It's like someone saying, "I'm going to fail this test," and they believe it. But because of that belief, they try harder and pass. So were they wrong? Or was their belief the very thing that changed the outcome? Or someone says, "You won't believe what I'm about to say," but then says something completely true. If you believe it, they were wrong. But if you didn't, they were right. Either way, the statement turns against itself. The Pinocchio paradox feels lighter than others. There are no equations, no ancient principles, no formal rules, just a puppet, a nose, and a prediction. But under that simplicity is something deeply human. We try to speak about the future. We try to say what will happen based on what we intend or expect. But when those intentions become the thing that determines the result, it creates a feedback loop. And that loop, when it's tight enough, becomes impossible to escape. This paradox, in the quiet of the evening, doesn't ask you to pick a side. It just sits beside you, gently reminding you how strange our sense of truth can be, especially when it's tangled up with our own predictions. Because the world doesn't always wait for our words to land before reacting. Sometimes a statement changes what it describes, and in that twist, truth slips away, just out of reach. But you don't need to catch it. You just need to follow it, softly, as it floats. Let it go unanswered. Let the nose grow, or not. let the contradiction rest. Because some puzzles are meant to calm, not solve. Crocodile paradox. A riverbank, a child, a crocodile. The scene feels like a fable, something ancient, strange, and moral. But the lesson here isn't about danger or fear, it's about logic, pure, twisting logic. This is the crocodile paradox. It begins when a crocodile snatches a child from a parent. Instead of vanishing into the water, the crocodile offers a strange condition. I will return your child to you if you correctly predict what I will do next. At first, it seems like a test, a cruel one, but a clear one. The parent thinks carefully, then says, "You will not return my child." And just like that, the trap closes, because now the crocodile faces a paradox. If the crocodile decides to return the child, the parent's prediction would be wrong, and the deal says the child should only be returned if the prediction is right. So the crocodile shouldn't return the child. But if the crocodile decides to keep the child, the prediction is right. The parent guessed correctly. So, according to the deal, the crocodile must return the child. Each path cancels the other. If the crocodile returns the child, it violates the rule. If it doesn't return the child, it also violates the rule. The crocodile paradox is born, not out of emotion or danger, but from self-reference wrapped in a condition, a deal that tries to judge truth based on prediction, when the outcome itself depends on that prediction. Let's pull it into daily life. Picture a game show host who says, if you guess what's behind the curtain, you win the prize. You guess nothing's behind the curtain. Now, if there is nothing, you guessed correctly, so you win something. But then there is something. That breaks the rule. If there's nothing, and that makes you right, you must win, which makes the guess wrong. It's not just trickery. It's a collision of conditional logic with truth prediction. The paradox appears when the act of guessing directly affects what happens next. This kind of logic problem pops up in more places than you'd think. In contracts, in programming, in courtroom strategy, in any situation where decisions rely on outcomes that are shaped by the decision itself. But the crocodile makes it clearer, simpler, more human. Because it's not just logic, there's a child, there's a parent, there's something at stake, and that's where the paradox cuts deeper. It shows the limits of fairness, when rules are designed to work perfectly, but fall apart under pressure. The crocodile isn't just a symbol of danger, it's a symbol of how rigid logic can collapse when confronted by real choices. You can't trick your way out, you can't logic your way through. The rule, by trying to be fair, becomes impossible to follow. And yet, there's something quiet in that collapse, something strangely peaceful. Because once you see the paradox, once you truly feel the loop, you stop trying to escape it. You step back, you let it swirl around itself. A choice that can't be made, a rule that can't be followed, a moment that has no answer. And it's in that moment, where logic folds, where outcomes blur, that the mind softens. You're not thinking to solve, you're thinking to feel, to witness, to rest in a problem that doesn't demand anything from you. The crocodile stays in the water. The child neither returns nor disappears. The question just hangs in the air without urgency. And the silence that follows is enough. Paradox of the court. It starts with a promise. A student agrees to learn from a master, not with money, not up front, but with a condition: the student will pay the teacher after winning his very first court case. It seems like a fair deal, a way for knowledge to be passed on without pressure. A win-win. But this is where the logic begins to twist. This is the paradox of the court. The teacher, Protagoras, is wise, respected, and confident. The student, Euathlus, is bright and ambitious. He takes the lessons, learns the law, and becomes a trained orator. But time passes and Euathlus never takes a case. He delays, he waits, he never sets foot in court. Protagoras grows impatient. He wants his payment. He sues his student. And now the contradiction arrives fully dressed in legal robes. Protagoras says, "If I win this case, you must pay me, because the court will order it. If you win the case, you must still pay me, because you will have won your first case, and our agreement said you'd pay me once that happened." Either way, he wins. Payment seems guaranteed. But Euathlus has his own logic. "If I win," he argues, "the court has ruled I don't have to pay. And if I lose, I still haven't won a case. Our agreement hasn't been fulfilled. So, in either case, I shouldn't owe you anything." Both arguments use the same tools: cause and effect, if and then. They both wrap themselves in reasoning so tight that nothing slips through. But they point in opposite directions. This is the paradox: two people, one contract, two conclusions that contradict, yet both feel perfectly sound. The paradox of the court is more than a courtroom problem. It's a mirror into how we justify what's fair, how intentions, conditions, and timing can form a loop that no judgment can cut cleanly. This kind of reasoning appears in everyday life more often than we notice. A parent tells a teenager, "You can go out once you show you're responsible." But the teen says, "How can I prove I'm responsible if you never let me go out?" A company promises a job after experience, but no one gives experience without the job. A writer waits to be published before writing seriously, but refuses to write seriously without being published. These are real loops, not just logic puzzles. They trap people, not because they're wrong, but because both sides carry truth, and neither can move first. The paradox of the court shows us what happens when fairness is frozen by structure, when agreements become too clever for their own good, when logic is used not to resolve problems, but to create unresolvable ones. And it's not about who's right, it's about the shape of the trap. Each person in the story thinks they're following the rules. Each believes the outcome should favor them. And that's what makes it powerful, not as a story of conflict, but as a quiet reminder that some arguments are mirrors, endlessly reflecting themselves. There's no need to pick a side. Just feel the stillness of a legal knot that ties itself. Let it stay tangled. Let the case stay unresolved. Because in that pause between judgment and silence, the mind finds something rare: the freedom to not untangle the mess, the space to breathe, not argue. The courtroom fades, the voices dim, and all that remains is a question without a verdict. And that's enough to rest in. Hempel's paradox, Raven paradox. Truth often feels like it's built from patterns. You notice something once, then again, and the more you see it, the more certain it feels. That's the heart of the Hempel's paradox, also known as the Raven paradox, a paradox that quietly questions how we gather proof. It starts with a simple idea: all ravens are black. Seems fair. You've seen ravens, they're black. You see another black raven, and it supports the rule. Over time, with enough black ravens, the rule begins to feel like a fact. But now consider this. That statement, "all ravens are black," is logically the same as saying, "all non-black things are not ravens." It's just the flip side. If something isn't black, it shouldn't be a raven. And here's where it slips. Suppose you're at a grocery store. You see a green apple, a banana, a carton of milk. None of them are black, and none of them are ravens. According to logic, each of those objects technically supports the claim that all ravens are black. because they are non-black and they are not ravens. A green apple, then, becomes evidence for black ravens. That's Hempel's paradox. It feels wrong, even laughable. But it's grounded in the way logic treats confirmation. If you accept that all A are B is the same as all non-B are non-A, then finding a non-B that is not an A still supports the claim. A white shoe, a blue notebook, a pink eraser. Each one, somehow, becomes a tiny drop of support for a world where all ravens are black. But that's not how our minds work. We value direct confirmation. We want to see more ravens. We don't care about pencils and teacups. Even if logic treats those as valid pieces of evidence, our intuition doesn't. And the paradox lives in that gap between pure logic and human reasoning. It questions how knowledge is built, whether confirmation by absence really counts, whether observing 1,000 green apples does anything to prove something about birds that aren't there. In the real world, this matters. Think of how we form beliefs. We look for examples that match what we already think. We ignore things that don't fit. But more importantly, we often overlook the strange truth that what we don't see might quietly be shaping what we believe. Every rainy day might confirm the idea that the world is gloomy. But does every sunny day disprove it? Every polite stranger supports your belief that people are kind. But does every rude one challenge it? And does a neutral face, a stranger you didn't meet, count for anything? Hempel's paradox holds a mirror to that process. It whispers, if you're going to count evidence, are you counting it all? It doesn't give you the answer. It just stands by holding the quiet question, what counts as proof? And in that pause, where apples confirm ravens and absence speaks, the brain slows. Not in confusion, but in curiosity. Because logic isn't just about answers. It's about noticing the strange spaces in between. And once you see those spaces, you stop rushing. You stop stacking proof. You stop chasing certainty. You just let the evidence float. The black raven, the green apple, the empty sky, all equal, all quiet, and that quiet is where the day softens, where the mind lets go. Diablo's paradox. Some paradoxes feel like loops. You recognize the circle as it forms, the contradiction built right into the sentence itself. But then there are those that hide the loop. They don't announce themselves. They don't say, I'm lying, or this sentence is false. Instead, they slip in sideways, quiet and clean. That's the power of Diablo's paradox. It's a paradox that unfolds through a sequence. No sentence refers to itself, not directly, not even once. And yet, when you look closely, everything begins to fold in on itself just the same. Here's how it works. You have an infinite list of statements. Each one says, all the following statements are false. That's it, one after another, each one pointing to the rest. The first one says all the others are false. The second says all those after it are false. The third does the same. And so on forever. At first, this feels like it should be safe. None of the sentences say anything about themselves. They each point forward to the next ones in line. But when you try to assign truth to them, true or false, something slips. Suppose the first sentence is true. That means all the others are false. But if the second one is false, that means not all the following statements are false. At least one must be true. But if that's true, then the first statement can't be true after all. So maybe the first one is false. That would mean not all the following statements are false. So at least one of them is true. Let's say it's the second one. But the second one also says all the ones after it are false. So the same contradiction happens again. No matter where you go in the list, the same twist appears. a soft collapse of logic. And yet, there's no sentence that refers to itself. No, this statement is false. No cycle. Just a smooth chain of references, like dominoes tipping into infinity. That's what makes Diablo's paradox so quietly clever. It removes self-reference completely. That's the part most other paradoxes rely on. This one doesn't need it. It builds a structure where contradiction is born not from direct loops, but from infinite deferral. Each statement pushes the problem forward, like a hallway of doors, each pointing to the next. But when you try to open one, they all lock themselves in reaction. It's a paradox of structure, not sentence. In real life, this resembles how assumptions stack. You might say, everything they say after this is wrong. But then, what if they say, everything after this is wrong? And someone else follows, making the same claim? At some point, truth becomes impossible to place. Each claim stands only by denying the one that comes next. This is how some arguments feel. Endless chains of people pointing fingers, each one saying the problem lies just beyond them. Nothing ever resolves because the contradiction is spread across the sequence, never resting in a single point. Diablo's paradox invites a different kind of stillness. Not the stillness of silence, but the stillness of standing in a hallway that doesn't end. Each sentence like a step forward, each step repeating the same uncertainty. And eventually, you stop walking. You stop needing to find the true one. You just stand there feeling the symmetry, the structure, the calm in the contradiction. Because not all paradoxes demand to be solved. Some just want to be noticed. Not rushed, not rejected, just allowed to exist. Like thoughts that lead nowhere, sentences that echo, and in that soft, infinite echo, the mind slows. Liar paradox. Sometimes the smallest sentence can carry the heaviest weight. Just 4 words. This sentence is false. That's it. No clever language, no deep vocabulary, just a quiet statement turning inward and tearing everything apart. This is the liar paradox, one of the oldest and most direct contradictions in logic. It doesn't hide behind layers. It doesn't need background. It simply speaks and collapses. Let's hold it up gently. If the sentence is true, then what it says must be accurate, so it's false. But if it's false, then it isn't telling the truth, which makes it true again. There's no escape, no stable ground. Each possibility flips into the other like 2 mirrors locked in reflection. This paradox doesn't ask a lot, just that you think, that you try to assign a value to a sentence that won't let you. And the more seriously you take it, the more quickly it slips through your fingers. It's like a loop without a beginning, a door that opens into itself. The liar paradox isn't just a sentence, it's a confrontation between the need to label and the refusal to be labeled. It exposes how language, though built to describe the world, can sometimes fold back and betray its own structure. And this isn't rare. You've felt it before. You hear someone say, "I always lie." If they're telling the truth, then they're lying, so they're not always lying. But if they're lying about always lying, then sometimes they're truthful. But then, maybe they're telling the truth, and around it goes. It shows up in real moments, too. A person says, "Don't trust anything I say." And for a second, your logic stutters. Because trusting that advice would mean distrusting it. And distrusting it would mean you should trust it. The liar paradox lives in that freeze. It's not about deception. It's about definition. It's what happens when a statement tries to both describe and disqualify itself at the same time. It's language turned on itself, not maliciously but accidentally, like a knot tied too tightly. Philosophers have struggled with it for thousands of years. Some try to call it meaningless. Others try to rewrite the rules of logic to make space for it. But the paradox doesn't mind, it doesn't fight back. It just sits there, unsolved, unchanged. That's what gives it power. It doesn't demand a solution. It simply exists, perfectly suspended in tension. You could try to categorize it, call it nonsense. Pretend the sentence doesn't refer to itself, but it does, and that's the whole point. It looks like logic until you touch it. Then it breaks, and in breaking, it reveals something calming. That not every problem has an answer, that not every loop needs to be closed, that you can let a contradiction stay where it is without needing to fix it. The liar paradox is like a softly ticking clock in the background. Constant, simple, impossible. It asks nothing of you except stillness. Just listen to it once more. This sentence is false. And let it drift. Knower paradox. There are things we know. There are things we don't. And then, there are things that shift when we try to speak them aloud. The knower paradox doesn't begin with a contradiction. It begins with confidence, with the idea that we can know what is true, and that if something is true, someone must know it. That's a comfortable thought, until it isn't. Let's step into the paradox. Take this sentence. This sentence is not known to be true. That's the heart of it. One quiet claim about knowledge. Now, ask, is the sentence true? If it is true, then what it says must be correct. It must be something that is not known to be true. But if it's true and no one knows it's true, how can it be true? Because you know it now. You're reading it. You're thinking about it. So you do know it. That means it can't be true that it's unknown. So maybe the sentence is false. But if it's false, that means this sentence is not known to be true is not true, which means the sentence is known to be true, but that would make it true again. It's a strange loop, not about lying, not about self-reference in the usual way. This one wraps itself in epistemology, the study of knowledge. The knower paradox shows how even the act of knowing something can shake its foundation. That truth and knowledge aren't always traveling together. Let's bring it closer to daily life. Picture a sealed envelope with a simple note inside. The message in this envelope is not known to be true. Before you open it, the statement might feel correct. No one knows what it says. No one knows whether it's true. But the moment you read it, the moment you know what the message is, it becomes something else. You now know the statement, which means it can't be unknown. But if it was never meant to be known, then reading it changed it. That's the paradox. Some truths stay truths until we become aware of them. Some ideas live quietly in the dark, and the moment we put light on them, they change shape. It's not just observation, it's presence. The act of knowing pulls the thread that unravels the certainty. And that question reaches into so many corners of our lives. How many secrets change the moment they're revealed? How many facts lose their edge once they're known? How many feelings vanish once they're spoken? The knower. Paradox isn't just about logic. It's about the fragility of awareness, the way knowledge reshapes the very truths it tries to hold. It's gentle, but unsettling. It suggests that maybe some things were never meant to be fully understood, that some truths are only stable when left unspoken. And in that idea, there's peace. Because the pressure to know everything, to name, to explain, to understand, can be heavy. But this paradox reminds us, some knowledge, when reached for, folds itself away. And that's not failure, that's balance. The mind slows here, not from exhaustion, but from surrender. You don't need to prove the sentence wrong. You don't need to confirm it right. You can just let it rest, quietly unknown. Strengthened liar paradox. At first glance, it seems like we've been here before. A sentence turning inward. A contradiction trapped in its own words. But the strengthened liar paradox is not just a replay. It's a refinement. A version of the liar paradox that slips past the obvious answers and presses deeper. Let's begin with this. This sentence is not true. You might think this is the same as the classic liar paradox, but this one is tighter, sharper, harder to dismiss. In the original, people tried to escape the loop by saying, maybe the sentence is neither true nor false. Maybe it's meaningless. But the strengthened version cuts off that escape. It doesn't claim to be false. It doesn't label itself. It simply says, I am not true. Now ask, is that statement true? If you say yes, if it is true, then what it says must be correct. So, it is not true. That collapses immediately. If you say no, it's not true, then you're saying the sentence isn't not true, which means it is true. Every move folds in on itself. Every answer flips back. You might try to declare it nonsense, but it's structured, it has grammar, it's understandable, it's not gibberish. So dismissing it feels like closing your eyes to the question. That's what makes the strengthened liar paradox different. It pushes past a simple paradox. It breaks your tools after you've picked them up. In life, we encounter echoes of this more often than we admit. Think of someone saying, what I'm telling you is not the truth, but you believe them. Because they seem sincere, because they sound honest. But if they're being honest, then they're telling the truth, which they said they weren't. Or a person says, I'm not reliable. You trust them. You believe they're being real. But if they're reliable in saying they're not, are they unreliable? This paradox isn't about lying. It's about language turning inward in a way that refuses to settle. A claim that denies its own truth, but does so in a way that feels solid, almost airtight. There's no room for resolution. No patch of ground to land on, no trick to undo it. And yet, that's where its power lies, because the strengthened liar paradox doesn't shout, it whispers, and the whisper is enough to shake the foundations of logic, not because it's loud, but because it's precise. It tells you. Even your clearest words can become fog when they point back at themselves. And maybe that's not a flaw. Maybe it's a feature of being human. We want everything to be either true or false. Right or wrong, yes or no. But in reality, some things hover in between. Not because they're broken, but because they are too perfectly balanced to tip either way. This paradox sits in that in between. And when you stop trying to solve it, when you just sit with it, something soft settles in. The effort fades, the tension loosens. The loop keeps turning, but now it's gentle. A sentence that cannot be true. A sentence that cannot be false. Just there, resting in the space between. And now, so are you. Quine's paradox. Some paradoxes walk straight into contradiction. Others drift into it slowly, sentence by sentence. Quine's paradox is different. It stands completely still and lets the contradiction build itself. There's no shouting, no flashing contradiction, just a quiet sentence that eats itself. It begins like this. Yields falsehood when preceded by its quotation, yields falsehood when preceded by its quotation. At first glance, it looks like nonsense, a maze of words. But when you take your time with it, when you follow it patiently, it begins to show its shape. Let's break it apart gently. The phrase yields falsehood when preceded by its quotation is talking about any sentence that, when quoted and then followed by itself, becomes false. So when you place that phrase in quotes and then attach the phrase itself after it, you get yields falsehood when preceded by its quotation. Yields falsehood when preceded by its quotation. The sentence refers to itself, not by name, not by pointing, but by construction. It doesn't say this sentence. It doesn't loop directly. It builds a structure where form is function. And now the trap tightens. If the sentence is true, then what it says must be correct. That means it yields falsehood when preceded by its quotation. But the whole sentence is its quotation followed by itself. So if it yields falsehood in that form, then it must be false. But if it's false, then what it says is incorrect, which means it doesn't yield falsehood when preceded by its quotation, meaning it's actually true. And around it goes. The paradox doesn't scream. It doesn't even self-identify. It just exists. Calmly recursive. As if it were built to do nothing else but stand in a room and question itself. That's what makes Quine's paradox so subtle and so deeply logical. It was designed to show that you can build a paradox without using phrases like this sentence. You don't need obvious self-reference. You don't need mirrors or predictions. All you need is language and a little structure. It's like programming a function that calls itself not by name, but by logic. A machine that turns on only when it recognizes itself. And the moment it runs, it collapses into contradiction. In real life, this isn't how we speak. But in thought, in abstraction, it happens more than you think. A person says, "What I'm about to say is untrue when taken as a whole," then speaks. And now you're left trying to decide, did the sentence undo itself or prove itself wrong? Or a rule book says, all rules that reference themselves are invalid. But if that rule applies to itself, it's invalid. If it doesn't apply to itself, maybe it's still valid. But then again, it references itself. These are not games. They're boundaries, quiet thresholds that tell us where logic can go and where it begins to fray. And maybe that's the real lesson of Quine's paradox. Not that it can be solved, not that it needs to be, but that language, for all its power, has edges. Soft ones, fragile ones that fold inward when touched too precisely. And there's something deeply calming about that. Knowing there are places where understanding simply loops, where no conclusion can land without undoing itself. So, you stop pushing, you stop searching, and you just listen. To the structure, to the silence, to the stillness within the sentence. It holds its own contradiction like a delicate object, and lets you rest beside it. Unexpected, hanging paradox. This one feels like a riddle until it starts feeling like a trap. Not of ropes or walls, but of expectation. The unexpected, hanging paradox begins with a strange promise. A judge tells a prisoner, "You will be hanged at noon on one weekday next week, but the execution will come as a surprise. You won't know the day until the moment the guard comes for you." And that's all it takes. The prisoner, now with time to think, begins to reason his way through the week. He thinks, it can't happen on Friday. If it hasn't happened by Thursday night, then Friday would be the only day left. But that wouldn't be a surprise, so it can't be Friday. He crosses it off. Then it can't be Thursday, he says. If Friday is out, and it hasn't happened by Wednesday night, Thursday would be the last possible day. And again, it wouldn't be a surprise. So it can't be Thursday either. He keeps going. Wednesday falls, then Tuesday, then Monday. One by one, he eliminates every possible day. By the end, he's sure there will be no hanging. It can't happen. The logic rules it out completely. And then, Wednesday comes, The guard arrives, he's completely surprised. That's the paradox. The hanging did happen, it was unexpected, and yet, by all reasoning, it was supposed to be impossible. The unexpected hanging paradox is a loop in the mind, not of time or language, but of prediction and belief. The prisoner thought he could outthink the unknown, that by eliminating possibilities he could eliminate the event itself. But the very act of trying to predict the surprise made the surprise possible again. It's not about punishment, it's about knowledge that collapses when you hold it too tightly. You felt this before. Maybe not with guards and gallows, but with moments you tried to prepare for. You told yourself, it'll happen then. Then it didn't. You told yourself, it must happen now. Then again, it didn't. So you relaxed, you let go, and then it came. Surprise doesn't live in facts, it lives in your expectations. And when you try to control the future with logic, you often end up circling back to the very thing you wanted to avoid or couldn't see. The unexpected. Hanging paradox reminds us that some outcomes only become possible when you stop trying to predict them. And that knowledge, while powerful, is sometimes the very thing that blinds us. It's the quiet irony of life, that trying to know everything can leave you least prepared. So maybe the answer is not to fight the surprise, not to dissect it, but to let it come. And in the softness of that surrender, your mind loosens its grip. The need to predict fades, the need to prepare vanishes, and what's left is a paradox. Still walking toward you, still uncertain, still beautifully unresolved. And you're ready for it, precisely because you're not. Ship of Theseus. It begins as a simple thought, a ship sailing through time. Wooden boards creaking, sails catching wind, ropes worn with use. Over the years, a plank rots. It's replaced, then another, and another. Slowly, piece by piece, every part of the ship is replaced until nothing remains of the original materials. And yet, the ship still floats, still sails under the same name, still called the Ship of Theseus. But now, ask quietly, is it still the same ship? This is the Ship of Theseus paradox, a question that drifts through philosophy, memory, and personal identity. It asks not just about objects, but about us. Because what happens if someone collects all the original pieces, the old planks, the worn nails, the torn sails, and rebuilds them into another ship? That one has all the original materials, but none of the continuity. So, which ship is truly Theseus's? Is it the one that remained, sailing on with new parts, or the one that was reconstructed piece by piece from what once was? There's no trick here, no hidden solution, just two ships, one of memory, one of material. Now, draw that question inward. You, too, have changed. Your body, your thoughts, your memories, replaced slowly over time. Cells regenerate. Beliefs evolve. Experiences reshape who you are. So, are you still the person you were 10 years ago? Or 20, or yesterday? Where is the line between change and identity? If every part of you can change, but you still call yourself me, then what exactly are you holding on to? Is it the name, the story, the shape, or something softer, something that doesn't show up in mirrors or DNA? The Ship of Theseus isn't just about a vessel. It's about continuity, about how something can remain itself while becoming something entirely new. You see it in relationships. A friendship that lasts through distance, time, disagreements. Changed, but still held together by something invisible. Something that doesn't wear out. You see it in traditions. Celebrated in different ways, with different people, but still called the same name. You see it in yourself, every scar, every habit, every change. Still you, but still. The question lingers. If nothing remains of the original, what makes the whole still true? The paradox doesn't demand an answer. It just asks you to slow down, to notice how much we depend on stories, on continuity, to define what things are. Because sometimes identity isn't in the parts, it's in the path, in the motion, in the way the ship keeps sailing forward, even as the tide carries its old pieces away. And in that drifting thought there's rest. Let it sail. Let the name remain. Let the ship be whatever it becomes, and let your mind settle beside it, floating quietly into stillness. Sorite's paradox, problem of the heap. It starts with a grain of sand, just one. You wouldn't call that a heap, not yet. Add another, still not a heap. Add a third, a fourth, a fifth, and the question begins to whisper. At what point does a heap begin? This is the Sorite's paradox, also known as the problem of the heap. A puzzle not of math or truth, but of vagueness. It doesn't shout contradiction. It gently smudges the line between what is and what isn't. Let's stay with the sand. You start with one grain. Everyone agrees, it's not a heap. Now add one more. Still not. Another? Still not. If one grain can't turn something into a heap, then when does the change actually happen? Is there a magic number, 10, 50, 1,000? No matter where you draw the line, it feels arbitrary. If 9,999 grains is not a heap, and 10,000 is, then what's so special about that single grain? Why does that one tip the scale? But if no individual grain makes the difference, then how does the heap ever appear at all? This is the heart of the paradox. When change happens gradually, step by step, it becomes hard to pinpoint when one thing becomes another. It's not just sand. Think of hair. At what point is someone bald? Is one hair enough? 2? 10? Or think of age. When does a child become an adult? Not in paperwork, but in essence. What moment marks the shift? You feel the answer, but you can't name it. The Sorite's paradox exposes how vague concepts don't play well with sharp boundaries. Words like heap, bald, tall, rich, short, old, they drift. And yet, we use them every day, as if they were solid. The problem isn't that the world is unclear. The problem is that language pretends it's not. We want definitions that stay still. But some things are too fluid, too continuous. The moment you try to measure them, they slide out of your grasp. Even identity works like this. When do you become you? At birth? Before? After a certain memory? Is there a number of experiences that make you who you are? And when do you change enough to no longer be the same? The Sorite's paradox tells us something quiet and deep, that not all truth is built from borders. Some of it is gradients, shades, transitions too soft to name. And that's okay. You don't need to know which grain makes the heap. You don't need to find the line between young and old, full and empty, enough and not enough. You can let things blur. You can let the concepts breathe, because in that breathing room, your thoughts soften. The need to decide fades. The definitions dissolve. And all that's left is a gentle hill of sand forming slowly. Not because it reached a number, but because it simply kept going. And that is enough. Grandfather's axe paradox. This one feels familiar, because you've already walked part of its path. But now the question sharpens. The grandfather's axe paradox is the cousin of the Ship of Theseus. It carries the same quiet weight, but brings it closer, more personal, more immediate. It starts with a tool, An old axe, your grandfather's. You keep it in the shed, handle worn smooth, blade dulled from years of use. One day the handle cracks, so you replace it. Then later the blade rusts, so you replace that too. Now you're holding an axe with a new handle and a new blade. Not a single original part remains. And yet, you still call it your grandfather's axe. But here's the twist. Someone finds the old handle and the old blade, stored, preserved, and rebuilds that axe. Now, two axes exist. One with continuity, one with original parts. Which is your grandfather's? Both? Neither? The paradox doesn't answer. It just holds the tension. Unlike the Ship of Theseus, which floats in myth, this paradox lives in your hands. It invites you to touch it, to feel it, to weigh it. Because the axe isn't about boats or identity in the abstract. It's about inheritance, memory, meaning. It asks, what makes a thing the same over time? Is it the material or the story? You've seen this with heirlooms, a rocking chair with replaced legs, a quilt patched with new fabric, a recipe changed slightly over generations. At what point is it no longer the same? But more than that, this paradox stares directly at you. If your body has changed, if your thoughts have changed, if your values, your beliefs, your voice have all shifted, are you still the same person your younger self once was? The grandfather's axe. Paradox asks without force, are we the sum of our parts, or the shape of our history? Maybe what stays the same isn't what you can touch. Maybe it's the continuity of attention, the memory of the swing, the purpose behind the tool. Maybe the axe stays your grandfather's because you believe it does, and maybe you stay you for the very same reason. Even if everything changes, every thought, every cell, there's something that watches, a thread, a silent, continuous observer that connects one moment to the next. And that thread isn't always visible, but it's always there. Software, quiet, steady. So the paradox rests, not in confusion, but in reflection. There's no need to answer, no need to decide which axe is real. You just hold it in your thoughts, feel the weight of it, and let it rest. Because identity isn't always about staying the same. Sometimes it's about carrying meaning through change. Omnipotence paradox. Some questions are small and sharp, like riddles. Others are wide and heavy, stretching into theology, logic, and the shape of power itself. The omnipotence paradox is the kind that stretches. It begins with a single question, one that looks innocent until it starts to pull at everything you know about strength, limits, and contradiction. Can an all-powerful being create a stone so heavy that even it cannot lift it? There it is. If the being can't create such a stone, then there's something it cannot do, meaning it's not all-powerful. But if the being can and then cannot lift it, then again, there's something it can't do. Either way, a limit appears. This is the omnipotence paradox, a contradiction that lives at the edge of infinite power. And the moment you try to push past it, it folds in on itself. The question isn't meant to mock belief or power. It's meant to explore the nature of limits. Because if you define all-powerful as the ability to do anything without restriction, the paradox reveals a quiet truth. Not all things are possible, even in theory. Some things are simply contradictions. It's like asking, can a square be a circle? Or can someone be taller than themselves? These aren't deep questions, they're linguistic knots, sentences made from broken assumptions. But the omnipotence paradox feels deeper because it asks this about power itself. It whispers, Is there a boundary where strength becomes self-defeating? You can see it in human ambition. Someone who wants to control everything ends up being controlled by that very desire. A leader who demands total freedom eventually limits the freedom of others and their own. A person who tries to never be wrong might avoid speaking altogether, trapped by their own standard. The paradox reveals that sometimes true power isn't in doing anything, but in knowing what not to do, in knowing where logic ends. You could say, an all-powerful being can do anything that's possible. But that still leaves the problem. Is contradiction possible? Can a being create a rule it cannot break? Can it erase itself completely and still exist? The paradox doesn't live in religion or science. It lives in structure, in the shape of how ideas are built. And its quiet lesson is that infinite doesn't always mean unlimited, that there is a difference between being bound by weakness and being bound by coherence. Power that contradicts itself stops being power. It becomes noise, a storm spinning in on itself. So maybe the answer isn't yes or no. Maybe the question itself is the boundary, a reminder that not everything spoken can be made real, that some ideas, however loud, are hollow when held up to light. And that too is comforting, because in a world that demands constant control, this paradox offers peace. You don't need to understand everything. You don't need to be unlimited. You just need to rest in what can be and let the contradictions pass like wind. Paradox of the stone. It begins with a single object, not an idea, not a symbol, just a stone. One so heavy, so immovable, so absolute, that the very act of creating it would test the limits of existence. This is the paradox of the stone, a close relative of the omnipotence paradox, but it sharpens the question even further. Can a being create a stone so heavy that even it cannot lift it? It sounds like a child's question, the kind that loops in circles and never quite lands. But hidden in its simplicity is a deep contradiction, one that challenges what it means to be limitless. Let's look at both paths. If the answer is yes, the being can create such a stone, then there's something it cannot do, lift it. So it's no longer all-powerful. If the answer is no, it cannot create that kind of stone, then again, there's something it cannot do. Either way, there's a limit. And that's the trap. But maybe the flaw isn't in power. Maybe it's in the question. Because the paradox of the stone hinges on whether impossibilities count as real things. Whether a contradiction, once shaped into a sentence, must be treated like a real challenge. We ask, can something create an unliftable stone? But unliftable by what standard? For whom? And what does can't mean when the subject is all-powerful? It's like asking, can a being who can do anything make itself unable to do something and still be able to do anything? A loop. A paradox dressed up in physical terms. But beneath that loop is a softer message, a reminder that language isn't always a perfect tool. Just because you can say something doesn't mean it makes sense. You can say a square circle. You can say an invisible sound. You can say a stone that cannot be lifted by an all-powerful being. But those aren't real things, they're collisions of definition. And the paradox becomes clearer. It's not about the stone. It's about asking whether the power to do anything includes the power to undo itself. You've seen this play out in everyday life. A person promises to be open-minded until someone disagrees with them. A system claims to be free until it's challenged. A belief says it can question everything except itself. At some point, power that turns inward begins to break, and maybe it's supposed to, because the paradox of the stone shows us something gentle, that the limit of power isn't weakness, it's coherence, a boundary not drawn in fear but in logic, and maybe that's where peace lives. Not in doing everything, but in knowing what doesn't need to be done. The stone remains still, not because it cannot be lifted, but because the question itself no longer needs to be asked. Meno's paradox, paradox of inquiry. What does it mean to search for something, to seek an answer, a truth, a thought not yet fully formed? We do it all the time, asking questions, chasing clarity. But every search begins with something, a starting point, a sense of what we're missing. Now ask yourself, how do you search for something you don't know at all? This is the quiet riddle at the heart of Meno's paradox, also known as the paradox of inquiry. It comes down to this. If you know what you're looking for, you don't need to search. But if you don't know what you're looking for, not even a little bit, how will you recognize it when you find it? You could walk right past it or miss it completely, because in your mind it has no shape, no label, no outline. So, what's the point of asking questions at all? That's the paradox. Inquiry seems impossible, because to ask a question you must already know enough to know what's missing. But if you already know that much, then why ask? It's a loop dressed as logic, but it cuts deeper, into how we grow, how we learn, how we change. Think of a child hearing a word for the first time. They don't know its meaning, but they're curious. They ask, not because they know the answer, but because they sense that something is there. This is where the paradox begins to soften, because maybe we don't need full knowledge to begin. Maybe all we need is a spark, a nudge, an absence that we can feel, even if we can't yet explain it. Think of love, or grief, or longing. You may not fully understand them, but when you feel them, you know. And from that knowing, the inquiry begins. Meno's paradox reminds us that learning doesn't come from having answers. It comes from recognizing the gap. You don't need to see the whole picture. You just need to notice the edge. The paradox teaches patience. It says, don't wait until you're certain before you search. Start with what you don't know. Let curiosity carry you forward, not despite your ignorance, but because of it. In the dark, you don't search for light because you've seen it. You search because you know something should be there, and that soft awareness is enough. So let the paradox rest. Let the question remain unanswered. Because sometimes the act of inquiry is the answer. And in that gentle act of wondering, your mind finds quiet. Not by solving, but by moving slowly through the unknown, with no need to arrive. Theseus's memory paradox. You've already met the ship. Wood replaced, ropes renewed, boards swapped out piece by piece, until not a single part of the original remains. But now, shift your focus, not to the ship's body, but to its mind. The Theseus's memory paradox asks, if memory fades piece by piece, do you remain the same person? It's not about ships anymore. It's about identity held together by memory, and what happens when those memories slip. Think of a man who remembers his childhood clearly. He recalls the street he grew up on, his first friend, the name of his school. Years pass. He forgets the school, then the street, then the friend. Eventually, he forgets those years entirely. So, now ask, if everything he remembers about who he once was is gone, is he still that same person? This is the Theseus's memory paradox, where identity is not measured by cells or scars, but by continuity of consciousness. If your memories shape yourself, and those memories are replaced, erased, or altered, who is it that remains? You've seen this in the quiet sadness of dementia. A person slowly forgetting names, faces, places, until even their own reflection feels like someone else's. And yet, there they are, breathing, smiling, still loved. But are they still the them they once were? Or consider dreams. In a dream, you sometimes believe you are someone else. You have memories, thoughts, a story. Then you wake up, and it vanishes. For that brief moment, did a different you exist? This paradox whispers in those gaps, in the spaces where memory isn't fully gone, but not fully there, and it forces the question, is identity the sum of remembered experience or something deeper that lives beneath it? Because if you can forget your childhood and still be you, and forget your voice and still be you, then maybe you are not your memories at all. Maybe you are the one who remembers, the observer, the vessel that holds what comes and goes. Like the Ship of Theseus, rebuilt plank by plank, your memories may change, fade, or be reshaped. But something, some presence, still moves forward. The paradox doesn't need to be solved. It only asks that you feel its shape, that you sit in the stillness of not knowing whether yourself is what you recall or what you are between the moments of recall. And in that stillness, peace forms. Because you are not asked to remember everything, you are simply asked to be. The memory may change, the vessel may shift, but the thread continues, soft, invisible, quiet, and that thread is enough. Paradox of tolerance. We often think of tolerance as a virtue, something that holds communities together, that allows space for difference, disagreement, and diversity. But what happens when tolerance opens the door to intolerance? This is the quiet tension behind the paradox of tolerance. It begins with a society that values freedom, where every voice has space, every belief, a right to be heard. Even the ones that reject the very idea of tolerance itself. And now the question forms, should a tolerant society tolerate intolerance? If it does, it risks being destroyed by those who do not believe in that freedom. But if it does not, then it stops being fully tolerant. That's the paradox, the very thing that makes a society open and just. The willingness to allow all voices can become the thing that allows it to be undone. You've seen this play out. An idea enters the conversation. It doesn't just disagree, it seeks to silence. It doesn't want space, it wants dominance. And yet, because the system is tolerant, it lets that idea grow, until it can no longer be stopped. This is not a thought experiment, it's history. Movements have risen under the protection of free speech, only to crush it when power was gained. Hate has dressed itself in the language of liberty, and destruction has often begun with polite debate. So, the question deepens. Is it intolerant to refuse a voice that would silence others? And if it is that wrong? The paradox of tolerance forces us to look at boundaries not as limits, but as protections. It says, there may be a point where tolerance must draw a line, not because it is weak, but because it must defend itself to survive. This isn't about censorship, it's about integrity, about knowing that some beliefs, if given enough space, will erase all others. And yet, this paradox isn't asking for answers. It doesn't offer rules. It simply holds the tension between freedom and fragility. You see it in personal relationships, too. Someone says, I can say anything I want, you have to accept it. But if what they say is cruel, controlling, or destructive, should that still be tolerated? At what point does acceptance become submission? And where is the line between openness and self-erasure? The paradox of tolerance teaches restraint, not rigidity. It doesn't say silence others. It says protect the space where voices can exist by not letting those who hate voices dominate the room. Because tolerance is not a blank check, it's a careful balance, a structure that allows for disagreement without collapse. And holding that structure requires care, judgment, clarity, not because we seek to dominate, but because we seek to preserve the space where thought can breathe. In that awareness, the noise begins to soften. You no longer rush to include every idea. You no longer fear drawing boundaries. You simply sit with the weight of the question and let it rest. And in that rest, tolerance is not erased. It is strengthened. Quietly, steadily, with purpose. Paradox of value. Diamond water. Paradox, you're thirsty, not just casually, truly thirsty. Now, picture two things in front of you: a glass of water and a diamond. One gives you life, the other luxury. And yet, if you walked into a store, the diamond would cost far more. This is the quiet contradiction behind the paradox of value, also called the diamond water paradox. A question that doesn't challenge logic, but exposes how we use it. It asks, why do we place higher economic value on things we don't need, while essentials, like water, cost so little? You need water to survive. You don't need diamonds at all, but in almost every economy, diamonds are worth far more. So where does value come from? For centuries, this question puzzled philosophers and economists alike. Water is essential. Diamonds are not, and yet water flows freely from faucets, sold in plastic bottles for a few coins, while diamonds sit behind glass, guarded, priced beyond most hands. It feels backward. The paradox comes from confusing use value with exchange value. Water has high use. It keeps you alive. Diamonds have low use, but are scarce, desirable, and hard to obtain. So the market assigns value not based on need, but on rarity and demand. And yet, even knowing that doesn't fully settle the mind. Because the deeper part of the paradox is emotional. You value things when you don't have them. But once they're abundant, they fade into the background. You think of air only when it's missing. You think of warmth only when you're cold. And you think of water when your lips crack with thirst. The paradox of value reveals how easily we overlook the ordinary until the ordinary disappears. A person can spend years chasing things that shine, that dazzle, that feel exclusive, while forgetting the quiet, necessary things that make life possible. Time, peace, sleep, health, a glass of water. We chase diamonds while stepping over streams. And maybe that's what this paradox is here to show us. That real value isn't just in rarity. It's in noticing what already surrounds us. The glass of water beside the bed, the silence that fills the room, the breath that moves in and out asking nothing. Value, in its truest form, often hides in plain sight. And as that truth settles in, the need to chase fades. The noise softens. You realize that maybe what you needed wasn't something glittering, just something clear, something steady, something already here. Bootstrap paradox. A young musician finds an old composition. It's beautiful, intricate, flawless. He copies it, note for note, learns it, performs it, and becomes famous for it. Years later, someone asks him where the piece came from. He says, "I found it in a forgotten manuscript." That manuscript, the one he copied it from? It turns out it's a copy of his version. Which means the music had no original composer. This is the bootstrap paradox, a loop in time where something exists without ever being created. You send a message to the past. That message causes someone to act. Their action leads to the message being sent. Round and round it goes, with no beginning. The paradox gets its name from the old phrase, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. Doing something impossible. Lifting yourself with your own hands. And in this case, it's information or objects doing the lifting. A book appears in the past, written by someone who found it in the future. A watch travels back in time, passed from a future self to a younger version. A tool, a message, a design, looping endlessly through time, with no origin. The contradiction lies in causality. We expect time to move forward. A causes B, B causes C. But in the bootstrap paradox, C causes A. The loop closes itself. You can't find the starting point because there is none. And yet, nothing seems broken. The loop sustains itself perfectly. That's what makes it haunting. And strangely beautiful. Think of knowledge. What if you discovered a theory only because someone else found it in your notes? What if your greatest discovery came from something you wrote, based on something they wrote, based on something you wrote again? No beginning, no end, just an idea suspended in time, echoing itself. It's not just science fiction. The bootstrap paradox challenges the very foundation of logic, cause and effect. If something exists only because it existed, where did it come from? The paradox doesn't break the rules. It bends them, subtly, gently. It says, what if time is not a line, but a loop? And if that's true, then not everything needs an origin. Not every idea needs a first thinker. Not every object needs a first maker. Some things simply are. The mind wants to resist this, to find the source, to unwind the knot. But not all knots need to be untied. Some are perfect as they are, infinite, circular, quiet. So, let the loop turn. Let the paradox remain suspended. No beginning, no end. Just a thought that moves through time, like a breath. Grandfather paradox. You step into a time machine. You travel decades into the past. You find a man, your grandfather, long before your parents were born. And for reasons unknown, you stop him from ever having children. Maybe by accident, maybe by choice. Either way, you erase the future. Now, ask yourself, if your grandfather never had children, how were you born to go back in time at all? This is the grandfather paradox, perhaps the most iconic time travel contradiction. A paradox that tears the timeline in two, simply by existing inside it. At its heart, the problem is simple. What happens when a cause erases its own effect? If you were never born, you could never go back. But if you never went back, your grandfather wouldn't have been stopped, which means you would have been born, which means you could go back, and around it goes, a loop with no way out. The paradox touches something fundamental. We expect the past to be solid, unchangeable, a road already walked. But time travel, even as a thought experiment, challenges that certainty. Because if the past can be altered, and those alterations ripple forward, then reality becomes unstable. Causality collapses. You've seen echoes of this idea in fiction. The traveler who saves a life, only to find history reshaped. The person who tries to prevent a tragedy, and becomes the cause of it. But this isn't just about stories, it's about logic stretched thin across time. The grandfather paradox forces a question we rarely have to ask: can time have contradictions? If cause leads to effect, but that effect destroys the cause, what happens to the timeline? There are theories that try to resolve it. Some say time would correct itself. blocking the paradox from completing. Others propose branching universes, where each change creates a new path. In one, you were born. In another, you never existed. But the paradox remains. It reveals a truth not just about time, but about limits. Not everything can be undone. Not every past can be rewritten without cost. And maybe there's comfort in that. Because the grandfather paradox reminds us that every moment is stitched to the next. Your choices, your memories, your existence, held together by the fabric of time, tight and connected. If you could unravel it all, you might lose more than you gain. So let the paradox rest. Let the loop stay unresolved. Let the past remain unaltered. Because in the soft tension between what was and what might have been, the present begins to slow, and your thoughts ease into quiet. Predestination paradox. You wake one morning with a strange message, a note, a warning, a piece of information that feels too specific to be random. And as the day unfolds, that message turns out to be true. It guides you, or maybe it limits you. You follow it, step by step, until the very moment it warned you about arrives. You try to avoid it, but in trying, you cause it. This is the predestination paradox, a loop of time where every action taken to prevent a future event ends up causing it. Unlike the grandfather paradox, where a contradiction destroys the loop, predestination is stable, complete, inevitable. Everything you do, every attempt to change what's coming, feeds directly into making it happen. You see this in myths, the prophecy that says a child will overthrow a king. So the king tries to stop it and ends up creating the exact path that fulfills it. You see it in science fiction. A time traveler tries to stop a disaster, only to realize their interference was the spark that started it. And you feel it in life. You try so hard to avoid a mistake that you overcorrect and fall. You prepare for disappointment so thoroughly that you cause the distance you feared. You protect someone from a truth, only for that protection to be the very thing that hurts them. The predestination paradox isn't about changing the past. It's about walking a road you never meant to build, only to discover you paved it yourself. It challenges free will, because if the future shapes the past, and the past creates the future, where do you begin? Are your choices real, or were they written long before you made them? It's a quiet question, not meant to frighten, just to soften your grip on certainty. Maybe it's not about whether you're free. Maybe it's about how freedom feels, even in a world where the story has already been told. Maybe the paradox is the story itself, one that only makes sense when seen from a distance. A loop that isn't broken but complete, whole, resting inside itself. And in that loop, you find something unexpected, peace. Because the pressure to fight time, to resist fate, begins to fade. You realize some paths were always going to lead here, not because you gave up, but because you were always the one walking them. So, let the loop hold you. Not as a trap, but as a circle, a quiet, continuous motion, no beginning, no end, just the soft echo of footsteps, returning home. Polchinski's paradox billiard ball. Picture a billiard table, smooth, still, one ball resting near the corner pocket. Now imagine a time machine, a small wormhole that lets the ball roll through, travel back just a few seconds, and reappear on the same table. You send the ball toward the wormhole. It disappears, then it reappears, a few seconds earlier, and knocks itself off course. Now the question forms. If the ball hit its earlier self and prevented it from entering the wormhole, how did it go back in time to interfere? This is Polchinski's paradox, a time travel puzzle wrapped in the gentle geometry of physics. It's clean, no people, no destiny, just a ball and a loop, breaking itself. Unlike the grandfather paradox, where a traveler erases their origin through action, Polchinski's paradox plays with momentum, angles, and timelines. The contradiction is physical. If the ball makes it through the wormhole, it goes back and hits itself. But if it hits itself, it never goes through the wormhole in the first place. So, which version is true? You can't have both. Physicists have tried to resolve this. Some propose that only certain paths are self-consistent. The ball might hit itself, but not hard enough to stop the time loop. Maybe it nudges its earlier self just right, redirecting it back into the wormhole with a slight change, but no contradiction. A collision that corrects rather than erases. Others suggest time itself resists paradox. Not through rules, but through consistency, as if the timeline naturally avoids contradiction, like a river flowing around a stone. The deeper message is this: causality may not be fragile, but it is precise. One small collision, one slight interference, and the structure of cause and effect starts to wobble. And it's not just about time machines. You see echoes of this paradox in real life. A person interrupts a conversation that was leading to their own invitation, accidentally preventing it. Someone prepares for a situation that would only happen if they hadn't prepared at all. A student studies for an exam because they fear failure, and ends up making the test harder than if they'd simply trusted themselves. Polchinski's paradox teaches us that interference, even with good intentions, often becomes its own cause. That trying to control a loop sometimes creates it. And that's a humbling thought. You don't always need to correct the past. You don't always need to alter the outcome. Because some moments, when left alone, flow perfectly. And when you try to bump them off course, you might only knock yourself away. So, let the ball roll, let it pass through the wormhole. Let it strike if it must, gently, softly, in a way that keeps the loop whole. And in that motion you'll find stillness. No paradox to fix, just a path that returns to itself, quiet and unbroken. Double time travel paradox. Time travel is strange enough once. One loop, one ripple, one contradiction to balance. But what happens when two versions of you exist at the same time, each traveling backward for their own reason? This is the double time travel paradox. And unlike most, this one doesn't start with theory. It starts with action. You go back in time for a reason, maybe to change something, to stop something, or to warn someone. But in doing that, you cross paths with another version of yourself, who also traveled back from a different future for a different reason. Now the timeline holds two travelers, both with intentions, both acting, both unknowingly shaping the same reality. And here's the twist. Each one creates a timeline that justifies the other. Each version of you creates the future that made the other come back. But if both of you change the past in different ways, whose future becomes real? The paradox unfolds when both actions cancel each other out. You try to stop an event, but the other you causes it. Or you prevent something, but only because the other you failed to. You're trapped in a knot of interference, each version of you undoing the other across time. And suddenly, you're not just dealing with paradox, you're dealing with self-conflict across timelines. The double time travel paradox is more than a logical riddle. It's a reflection of what happens when multiple intentions, each rooted in certainty, collide. It's like arguing with yourself through memory. You believe you're right in the present. But another version of you, shaped by different experiences, believes they are too. Both of you act. Neither of you wins. Because the very act of trying to fix something causes the very thing you came back to prevent. You've felt this in simpler ways, making a decision based on a past regret, only to create a new regret that loops back around, trying to fix a mistake too quickly and creating one larger than before, chasing closure in two directions and never finding peace. That's what the double time travel paradox really points to, the impossibility of editing the past without creating new futures. Not just because time is fragile, but because you are. Your reasons, your memories, your fears, they all grow in different directions. And when they collide, whether through time or thought, something always gets erased. So maybe the answer isn't to keep jumping back, not to try again or correct the correction. Maybe the answer is to stop and let one version stay still. Because sometimes peace doesn't come from motion, it comes from letting go of the loop. Two travelers, one timeline, and one moment of stillness, where the need to change fades, and the paradox finally rests. Temporal causality loop. Some stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end, a straight line, time marching forward. But not all stories follow that shape. Some double back, some curl inward, some feed their own origin. This is the temporal causality loop, a paradox where time folds into itself, and an event becomes both the cause and the effect of itself. You see a man receiving a phone call from a stranger. The stranger gives him critical information just in time. He follows it, survives, and later in life makes the same call to himself, years earlier. So who made the decision? Who gave the warning first? It wasn't the future, and it wasn't the past. It was the loop. Each version of the event sustains the next. A causality loop doesn't contradict itself. It completes itself. There's no break, no missing link, but also no beginning. The past and the future become entangled. They rely on each other to exist, and the longer you think about it, the more it shifts. Because we think of time as directional. One thing leads to another. But in a temporal loop, that flow becomes circular. The effect causes the cause, which causes the effect, and on it turns. You've felt this in gentler ways. A thought that seems spontaneous, but you later realize came from something you did long ago. An action that feels free, but was shaped by something you've forgotten. A decision that creates the conditions that made the decision necessary. Even in daily life, causality is not always clean. A student becomes a teacher because a teacher once inspired them. Years later, they inspire a student who grows up to inspire someone else. And eventually, that person becomes the very teacher the first one admired. Loops happen more than we think. But the temporal causality loop shows us what it looks like when time itself refuses to point in one direction. And in doing that, it softens our grip on the timeline. Because maybe not all stories start at the beginning. Maybe some simply emerge, already shaped, already turning. And that turning doesn't need to be solved. It can simply continue. No pressure to break the loop. No rush to unwind it. Just a quiet acceptance that cause and effect are sometimes twins, mirroring each other in endless rhythm. And in that rhythm, your thoughts slow. Your breath deepens. Not because the paradox is finished, but because it doesn't need to finish. It just needs to hold. Newcomb's paradox. Two boxes sit in front of you. One is transparent. You can see inside. It holds $1,000. The other is opaque, mysterious. You don't know what's in it, if anything at all. You're told you can take only the opaque box or you can take both boxes. But there's a twist. Before you walked into the room, a highly accurate predictor, nearly perfect, already made a decision. If it predicted that you would choose both boxes, it left nothing in the opaque one. If it predicted you would take only the opaque box, it placed $1 million inside. And now you choose. This is Newcomb's paradox, a game between free will and prediction, between what you want and what was already anticipated. The logic tugs in both directions. If the predictor is almost always right, then your best move is to take only the opaque box, because doing so likely means it's full of money. But if the prediction has already been made, if the future is fixed, then your decision now can't change anything. So you might as well take both. And there it is, a paradox of trust, of belief, of logic versus instinct. You know that taking both gives you at least $1,000. But if you trust the predictor, walking away with only the opaque box might get you $1 million. Do you act based on what is or what was expected? This paradox isn't about boxes, it's about whether prediction and choice can exist in the same breath. Can your decision be free if someone already anticipated it? And if it was predicted, were you ever really deciding? In real life, we feel this in small moments. You hesitate before doing something impulsive because you know someone's expecting it. You change your behavior because someone believes in you, and that belief shapes you. You try to defy expectations only to fulfill them in a different way. Newcomb's paradox lives in those moments, where the past tries to reach forward, where the future waits for your choice, even as it feels like the choice has already been made. And the deeper you think, the more the edges blur, because this paradox isn't trying to corner you, it's trying to show you something, that sometimes belief shapes outcome, that trust, especially in systems or people, can loop back into reality. The predictor doesn't control you, but your belief in its power might. And maybe that's the most human part of all. We act based on what we believe others expect. We change our behavior because of trust. We let prediction guide us, not always out of fear, but out of logic. The paradox doesn't end with a perfect answer. It ends with a choice. 2 boxes, 1 decision, and a still moment between trust and doubt. Let the question hang, let it drift. You don't have to choose, not now. Just sit with the weight of the paradox, not to solve it, just to breathe inside it. Chronology, protection, conjecture. Some paradoxes build on contradiction. Some pull time into loops, but this one is different. It doesn't trap you in a loop, it protects you from one. This is the chronology protection conjecture. It begins with a warning, quiet, mathematical, and serious. If time travel into the past were ever possible, something would step in to stop it. Not a person, not a rule, but reality itself. The chronology protection conjecture suggests that the laws of physics prevent time travel to the past, precisely because of the paradoxes it would create. It's not science fiction, it's science pulling the emergency brake. The idea was first shaped to explain why time travel, though mathematically possible under certain equations, never seems to show up in the real world. We can imagine wormholes, we can calculate curves in space-time, but the moment we try to use them to go backward, something breaks. Radiation surges, equations collapse, stability vanishes, and the very structure of time begins to fray. It's as if the universe resists, as if time, knowing its own fragility, protects itself from being rewritten, not because it hates time travelers, but because it cannot survive their contradictions. It's a quiet principle, an invisible hand closing doors that would open too far. You see echoes of this in nature. A tree grows around an obstacle rather than through it. A river changes course when the land can't support its flow. The path shifts, not to stop progress, but to preserve stability. The chronology protection conjecture suggests time works the same way. It bends, it curves, but it never lets you fold it backward into itself, because doing so might unravel too much, might let paradoxes through the cracks, might invite events with no cause, people with no birth, objects with no creation. It protects not out of force, but out of balance, and in that balance there's comfort. The past remains untouched, not because we can't imagine changing it, but because the fabric of time won't allow us to. It's a form of mercy, letting every moment be what it was, unchanged, unmoved, intact. We often dream of going back, to fix something, to undo something, to see it all again. But this paradox reminds us, the past is safe precisely because we can't return to it. And in that safety, we are freed. Freed to let go. Freed to stop asking what if, and start breathing in what is. No loops, no breaks, just a timeline held in place, not by chains but by care. Let that be enough. Let time protect itself, and let yourself drift forward, unburdened. Twin paradox relativity. There are two twins. One stays on Earth. The other boards a spaceship, built for speed, nearly the speed of light, and begins to travel far and fast. Years pass, or so it seems. When the traveling twin returns, something strange has happened. They've aged only a little. Their sibling, still on Earth, has grown older by decades. They were born together, but now they are separated, not by distance but by time itself. This is the twin paradox, a consequence of Einstein's theory of relativity. And it's not fiction, it's science, real, tested, true. Time, it turns out, doesn't move the same for everyone. According to special relativity, the faster you move through space, the slower you move through time, relative to those who stay still. Speed stretches time, not metaphorically, literally. So, the twin who traveled at near light speed lived fewer years. Their clocks ticked slower. Their heart beat slower. Their body aged slower. To them, only a short trip has passed. To their sibling, a lifetime. And now, imagine the reunion. Two people once identical, now no longer equal in time. Not because of magic, not because of paradox, but because of motion. The twin paradox isn't a contradiction. It only feels like one, because our intuition says time is universal. That 1 second for you is 1 second for me. But the universe doesn't work that way. Time stretches, time bends, time slows. And the deeper truth behind this paradox is simple but unsettling. Your experience of time depends on how you move through the world. And maybe that's more than physics. Maybe it's something we live every day. Think of a friend who stayed in one place while you traveled, changed, drifted. You meet again. And though the calendar marks the same years, it feels like your lives have moved at different speeds, or the long hours spent waiting, versus the short ones spent laughing, same minutes, different feeling. Time is not just a number, it's a rhythm, a perspective, a path that curves and stretches as we walk it. The twin paradox holds no contradiction, only wonder. It tells us that the universe has room for difference, that time itself can flex, that sameness does not always stay the same, and that's okay, because maybe we're all traveling through time at slightly different speeds, and maybe the beauty isn't in matching, but in meeting. Two lives, two timelines, crossing again after taking their own strange paths. So let time bend, let it stretch, and let yourself rest in the idea that even if we drift apart in years, reconnection is always possible. Buridan's ass. Picture a donkey, hungry, thirsty, standing perfectly still. To its left, fresh water. To its right, hay. Both are equally close, both equally appealing, but the donkey can't choose. It looks left, then right, left again. And in the perfect balance of indecision, it starves. This is Buridan's ass, a paradox that feels absurd, until you realize how often you live inside it. It asks, what happens when two choices are perfectly equal, and there's no reason to pick one over the other? Rationality tells you to choose the better option, but what if they're the same? No preference, no bias, no hint. Then what? You freeze. Not because you're weak, but because reason offers no path forward. The donkey, driven only by logic, finds itself paralyzed. And the deeper truth of the paradox is this: pure logic, with no emotion, no randomness, no outside push, can fail. You've felt this. Two job offers, two cities, two people. Each path seems equal, until the weight of deciding becomes heavier than either choice. And the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to move. Buridan's ass reveals the flaw in over-rational thinking. When the mind seeks a reason and finds none, it can collapse into silence. But real life isn't silent. Sometimes we choose based on a whisper, a gut feeling, a flicker of instinct, an invisible nudge. And those nudges aren't irrational, they're human. Emotion fills the gaps where logic falls quiet, and that's not failure, it's function. The paradox doesn't ask you to become the donkey. It warns you against becoming only your thoughts, because sometimes action is more important than certainty. Sometimes moving, any direction, is better than starving in the middle. So let the paradox fade. Let go of the need for perfect clarity. If the path splits evenly, trust the step you take. And as the decision becomes lighter, so does the moment. So does the mind. So does everything. Abilene Paradox. It begins with something simple, a group of people, a shared moment, a question no one wants to answer honestly. One person suggests a trip to Abilene, a long, dusty drive. Hot, inconvenient, but no one objects. One nods, another shrugs, they all agree. And so, they go. Hours later, back home, someone finally says, "I didn't want to go." Another says the same. One by one, they admit the truth. No one wanted the trip. They all went because they thought everyone else wanted to. This is the Abilene Paradox, a quiet contradiction that lives in assumed agreement, where people do something none of them want, because each one believes everyone else does. It's not a lie, it's silence. It's the moment you say sure when you mean no. It's the nod in a meeting, the forced smile, the vote you didn't really want to cast. It's small decisions that ripple outward until an entire group finds itself somewhere no one intended to be. And it doesn't come from pressure, it comes from politeness, from fear of rocking the boat, from not wanting to be the one who speaks against the group. So instead, you drift, together, silently, into something no one chose. The Abilene Paradox isn't about big mistakes, it's about quiet ones. Unspoken agreements that build a reality no one wanted, and no one questions. You see this in families, a holiday trip that drains everyone. A tradition no one enjoys, but no one dares cancel, You see it in teams, projects approved, deadlines agreed upon, even though each person silently disagrees. And you see it in life. People following paths that feel empty, not because they want to, but because they think they're supposed to. The paradox reveals how often our actions reflect our assumptions, not our desires, and how easily groups can move in the wrong direction, because no one paused to ask, do we really want this? And maybe that's the key, not to avoid every Abilene moment, but to catch it early, to check in, to give each voice the room to say, actually, I'm not sure, because the power of the paradox dissolves the moment someone speaks honestly, and in that honesty the loop breaks, the silence fades, the false agreement unravels. So let the paradox teach you to listen. To others, yes, but especially to yourself. Not every nod means yes, not every smile means agreement, and not every trip is worth taking. Let stillness be your permission to pause, and in that pause you might hear the truth. Software uncertain, but finally free to speak. Paradox of voting downs. Paradox, you're standing in a voting booth, pen in hand, ballot in front of you. You've done the research, you have your values, you believe in your voice. But somewhere in the back of your mind, a question whispers, does this vote actually matter? This is the heart of the paradox of voting, also known as the Downs paradox. It begins with logic, cold, clean logic. In any large-scale election, the chance that your single vote will decide the outcome is almost zero. The margin is almost always bigger. The winner would win or lose, regardless of your tiny mark on the page. So, from a rational, self-interested standpoint, voting seems pointless. The cost, your time, your effort, is real. The payoff, your impact, is practically non-existent. And yet, people vote, in huge numbers, in every country, every year. Why? This is the paradox. Rational choice theory says you shouldn't. That if the personal cost outweighs the personal gain, the action isn't worth it. But something pulls you to the booth anyway. And the deeper truth is this. People are not just calculators. We're citizens, believers, carriers of collective will. Voting isn't just about outcome. It's about participation. It's about identity. It's about the belief that even the smallest voice deserves to be heard, regardless of volume. The Downs paradox exposes the gap between individual logic and collective meaning. It shows that systems built on reason alone often forget the weight of principle, of ritual, of showing up. It's like applauding at a concert. Your single clap adds almost nothing. But without you, the silence would be louder. You've felt this in other ways too. Standing in a protest where your presence won't change policy, but still matters. Donating a small amount to a massive cause, knowing it won't solve everything, but believing it helps. Choosing honesty, even when no one will know. These aren't strategic moves, they're values in motion. And that's what the paradox of voting gently reminds us. That not everything valuable is efficient. Not everything meaningful is measurable. Sometimes we act not to change the world alone, but to say, I was part of this. So let the numbers fall away, let the odds go quiet, and feel the weight of a choice, however small, that still belongs to you. 2 envelopes. Paradox, a table, 2 envelopes, both sealed. You're told one of them contains twice as much money as the other. You pick one, hold it. But before opening it, you're given a choice. Do you want to switch? There's no catch, no trick. Just a simple question. You pause, you reason. What if you're holding the smaller amount? Then switching could double your money. But if you're holding the larger one, switching cuts your winnings in half. Still, your mind starts to calculate. Let's say your envelope holds $50. That means the other one is either $25 or $100. So the expected value of switching feels like an average, 0.5 times $25 plus 0.5 times $100 equals $62.50, which is more than $50. So, shouldn't you switch? Yes, but wait. Now you're holding the other envelope. It might contain $50 again, which means your previous envelope was either $25 or $100. So now switching again seems better. You could switch back, and again, each time the math says, switch. But if that's true, you could switch forever. That's the two envelopes paradox, a trap not of numbers, but of expectation, where logic loops around itself, whispering that each move forward is better, even when nothing actually changes. The paradox lies in how we calculate expected value. We assume that the unknown envelope always has a 50% chance of being double or half. But that assumption isn't stable, because without knowing the original amounts, the probabilities don't hold. You're building logic on air. You see this in life too. A person switches jobs, thinking the next one will be better. Then switches again. Then again. Each time chasing a number, a feeling, a promise of more. But more is never certain, and better is rarely stable. The two envelopes paradox reminds us, sometimes the illusion of gain comes from the act of comparison itself. You're not losing. You're just being told there might be more, and that maybe is enough to stir the doubt, but doubt doesn't mean truth. Sometimes the wisest move isn't to switch, it's to stop, to accept the envelope in your hand, to sit with it, to let it be enough. Because peace doesn't always come from maximizing, sometimes it comes from letting go of the need to. So place the envelope on the table. Let the loop go quiet and rest. Prisoner's dilemma. Two people. Two choices. One decision, made in silence. You're both arrested, questioned separately, no way to communicate, no chance to coordinate. And then the offer comes. If you betray the other while they stay silent, you go free, and they serve 10 years. If they betray you while you stay silent, they go free, and you serve 10 years. If you both stay silent, you both get 1 year. But if you both betray, 5 years each. You're left alone with the question, do I protect them or protect myself? This is the prisoner's dilemma, a paradox of trust, strategy, and fear. Logically, betrayal seems safer. It avoids the worst-case scenario. It gives you control. And that's what makes this paradox so haunting. Mutual cooperation leads to the best shared outcome. But mutual fear leads to the worst. The structure of the dilemma pushes both people toward betrayal, even though both would be better off if neither betrayed. And yet, they almost always betray. Why? Because you're not deciding in a vacuum. You're deciding based on what you think the other person will do. And if they're thinking the same way, trust collapses. The prisoner's dilemma is more than a thought experiment. It's a reflection of everyday life. You see it in politics, where countries arm themselves not because they want to attack, but because they fear being unarmed. You see it in business, where companies raise prices or cut corners because they believe their competitors will do it first. You see it in relationships, where people hold back, withdraw, or protect themselves because they're afraid the other person will hurt them if they don't. And all of this, every betrayal, every silence, happens under the same logic. I must protect myself, just in case you don't protect me. But the paradox asks something deeper. What if you did trust? What if you chose cooperation, even in risk? The rewards are greater. But so is the vulnerability. That's what makes the prisoner's dilemma powerful, not just as a puzzle, but as a mirror. It shows us the fragile line between self-interest and mutual good, and how easily we tip the wrong way, not out of malice, but out of fear. It doesn't say trust always. It doesn't say betray never. It just says look closely at how your fear shapes your choices. And in that awareness, something changes. The tension softens. The instinct to protect loosens. And you begin to see the other person not as a threat, but as someone stuck in the same paradox as you. Two people, one choice. And maybe a shared moment of courage. Trolley problem. A track. A trolley. And a decision you never wanted to make. The trolley barrels forward, unmanned, unstoppable. Ahead, 5 people are tied to the track, helpless, seconds from death. But beside you is a lever. If you pull it, the trolley diverts to another track. On that track, one person is tied down. So, now the question, do you do nothing and let 5 people die? Or pull the lever and actively cause the death of one? This is the trolley problem. A moral paradox, a test of ethics, intention, and consequence. At first glance, the numbers seem simple. Save 5, lose 1, a net gain of life. But your hands tremble on the lever, because it's not just about numbers, it's about action. Doing nothing lets nature run its course. Pulling the lever makes you responsible. So, which is worse, allowing death or causing it? And that's where the paradox deepens. Some say morality is outcome-based, that the greatest good, the most lives saved, should always win. Others say morality is rooted in intention, that actively taking a life, even to save others, crosses a sacred line. The trolley problem doesn't give answers, it gives weight. And the more you think, the more complex it becomes. What if the one person is your child? What if the 5 are strangers? What if the one person is a doctor who could save thousands? What if the 5 are criminals? Each variation pulls the lever in your mind a different way, because the paradox isn't really about trains, it's about the price of action, the guilt of involvement, the silent cost of doing something, or doing nothing, and we face it more often than we admit. You see someone being mistreated. Do you intervene, risking backlash, or stay silent? A company can lay off 10 workers or cut one high-paying executive. Which decision hurts less? Which one feels fair? The trolley problem asks you to sit in the discomfort of choice, to accept that sometimes there is no perfect answer, only consequences. It doesn't want to break you. It wants to awaken you to the weight of your decisions, to the empathy behind your hesitation, to the humanity within your uncertainty. Because morality isn't math, it's messy, emotional, alive. And in that complexity, we begin to soften. We stop demanding clarity. We begin to accept that sometimes being unsure is the most honest place to stand. So, let the trolley roll, let the lever wait, let yourself sit quietly in the ache of the impossible. Because sometimes reflection is enough. Paradox of choice. A shelf full of cereal. Rows of color. Boxes stacked like buildings. 12 brands, 40 flavors, endless options. You reach out, then stop, you hesitate, you compare, you check labels, and suddenly, something strange happens. You feel less certain, less satisfied, less free. This is the paradox of choice, a quiet contradiction where more options don't always lead to more happiness. In fact, sometimes they lead to less. The modern world tells you that freedom is choice, that the more paths you can walk, the more fulfilled you'll be. But the mind doesn't work that way. When the choices stack up too high, you begin to second guess. What if I choose wrong? What if the other option was better? What if I regret this? Choice becomes pressure. Abundance becomes paralysis. You've felt this in small things. Picking a movie, a dinner spot, a pair of shoes. You scroll, swipe, hesitate, rewind. Then, sometimes, choose nothing at all. And you felt it in big things too, a career, a partner, a city to live in. The more options you have, the more you fear missing out on the one that might have been perfect. And in chasing perfection, you lose peace. That's the core of the paradox of choice. Too many options don't liberate you. They exhaust you. Because each decision carries opportunity, but also loss. Every choice is also a rejection of all the others. And the more there are, the heavier that rejection feels. And yet, the answer isn't to remove choice, it's to reframe it, to realize that satisfaction doesn't come from getting it right. It comes from being okay with what you've chosen. You don't need the perfect option. You need the ability to stop searching, and sometimes less choice isn't a limitation. It's a gift. It narrows the noise, it calms the mind, it lets you move forward without constantly looking back. So, as the paradox unfolds, let it go, let enough be enough. Because peace doesn't always come from having more. It often comes from choosing and then resting. Ellsberg paradox. A clear box sits in front of you. Inside, 90 balls. You're told 30 of them are red, the other 60, some combination of black and yellow, but no one knows how many of each. Now you're offered a simple bet. Option A, you win $100 if a red ball is drawn. Option B, you win $100 if a black ball is drawn. Which do you choose? Most people pick red. Now, another offer. Option C, you win $100 if a black or yellow ball is drawn. Option D, you win $100 if a red or yellow ball is drawn. This time, most people choose black or yellow. But here's the catch. Choosing red over black in the first scenario means you believe red is more likely than black. But choosing black or yellow over red, or yellow in the second, means you believe black is more likely than red. The preferences contradict. That's the Ellsberg paradox. It reveals a deep tension in the human mind. We prefer known risks over unknown ones, even when the odds might be better. In the first choice, red feels safe. You know there are 30 red balls. But black, that's a mystery. Maybe 0, maybe 60, so you avoid it. But then, when black is grouped with yellow, now it feels safer, even though nothing has changed. This is the power of ambiguity aversion. We don't just fear risk, we fear not knowing the risk. And that fear shapes more than games. It shapes how we invest, how we vote, how we plan. You've felt it. Choosing a familiar path, even if it's boring, over a new one that feels unpredictable. Picking a brand you've seen before, even when a cheaper option might be better. Avoiding a question, a challenge, a chance, because you're not sure what it holds. The Ellsberg paradox teaches us this. Uncertainty feels heavier than risk, not because it is, but because the unknown is hard to quantify, and what we can't measure, we tend to fear. But not all unknowns are danger. Some are opportunity. Sometimes the mystery holds more value than the certainty we cling to. And once you see that, You stop needing full clarity before you act. You allow room for trust, for movement, for peace with the unknown. So, let the paradox sit, not as something to solve, but as something to soften. Because not every decision requires a guarantee. Sometimes it just requires a breath. Allais paradox. It starts with two choices, side by side, each offering money, each designed to test something deeper than math. Choice 1. Would you prefer a guaranteed $1 million or a 10% chance of getting $5 million, an 89% chance of getting $1 million, and a 1% chance of getting nothing? Most people choose the sure $1 million. Now, another set. Choice 2. Would you prefer an 11% chance of winning $1 million or a 10% chance of winning $5 million? This time, most people choose the chance at $5 million. But here's the paradox. In both scenarios, the structure of risk is the same. The change in odds is consistent, and yet your preference flips. This is the Allais paradox. It reveals a conflict between expected utility theory, what you're supposed to choose rationally, and what you actually feel when certainty is placed beside possibility. In the first case, the sure thing feels too good to give up. It's safe, clean, simple. $1 million in your hand is worth more than any chance at more. But when both outcomes are uncertain, the heart opens to risk, because now there's no safety to lose, only bigger or smaller gambles. The paradox shows that people don't just evaluate outcomes. They react to certainty itself. That 100% feeling, it's powerful, it calms the brain, it outweighs probability, even when the math says you should go the other way. And that's the point. The Allais paradox isn't about getting the most money. It's about how we respond to certainty, regret, and the illusion of control. We don't just fear loss, we fear missing out on a sure thing. We fear the moment we choose uncertainty, only to watch the guarantee vanish. You've felt it, skipping a stable offer for a risky one, and then wondering if you made a mistake, holding back from a big opportunity because the sure path felt safer. We value certainty not because it's better, but because it feels more real. But life rarely offers 100%. Almost every decision you make involves unknowns. So what happens when we stop chasing guarantees? What happens when we allow good enough to be enough? The Allais paradox doesn't shame you for choosing safety. It simply shows you how deeply certainty tugs at the mind. And once you see that tug, clearly, gently, you can loosen its grip. Let risk be what it is. Let certainty fall away. Let decisions be made not just by numbers, but by awareness. And in that awareness, the pressure fades. Paradox of thrift. You tighten your budget, skip the extras, cut back, save. It feels responsible, wise, safe. Now imagine everyone else does the same. Families, shops, businesses, governments, the entire economy starts to save. And suddenly, something strange happens. The more everyone saves, the less there is to save. This is the paradox of thrift. It begins with a simple truth. Spending fuels economies. When you buy, someone earns. When they earn, they spend. And the cycle continues. But when too many people pull back, that cycle slows. Businesses lose revenue, jobs get cut, incomes drop. And in the end, everyone is poorer, even the savers. It's a contradiction between what's smart for the individual and what's damaging when everyone does it. The paradox reveals a flaw in logic that feels almost too obvious to notice. What's good for one isn't always good for all. You've seen it happen. During recessions, people save out of fear, but that fear dries up demand, which causes more layoffs and gives people more reason to fear. It's a loop, rational on every level, and yet destructive in motion. The paradox of thrift is not an attack on saving. It's a reminder that economies are interdependent. Your caution affects others. Their caution affects you. And the real insight? We don't live in isolated systems. We live in webs, where every action echoes outward. Even your best intentions, saving, protecting, preserving, can create ripples that come back, emptier than before. It's the same in life. You withhold love to protect yourself, but others sense it and do the same. You become distant to avoid hurt and end up feeling more alone. Sometimes the safest move is what makes you feel most vulnerable. Sometimes spending helps everyone. Sometimes giving makes you richer. Sometimes showing up, open, uncertain, is what breaks the loop. The paradox of thrift teaches not that saving is wrong, but that balance is everything. Responsibility and generosity, caution and courage, holding and letting go. So as the paradox settles into thought, let go of the fear that makes you clutch too tightly. Let the cycle breathe, let motion return. Because sometimes what seems like loss is the beginning of flow. St. Petersburg Paradox. You're invited to play a game. It's simple. A coin toss. Heads, the game continues. Tails, it ends. Here's how the payout works. If the first toss is tails, you win $2. If it's heads and then tails, you win $4. 2 heads, then tails, $8. 3 heads, then tails, $16. Each extra head before a tails doubles the payout. It keeps going like that forever. Now the question, how much would you pay to play this game? You do the math. There's a 1/2 chance of winning $2, a 1/4 chance of winning $4, and 1/8 chance of winning $8, and so on. If you sum the expected value, 1/2 times $2 plus 1/4 times $4 plus 1/8 times $8 plus, the total rises infinitely. So mathematically, the game is worth an infinite amount of money. But now, stop and ask yourself, would you pay $100 to play this game? Probably not. Most people wouldn't pay even $10. That's the contradiction. That's the St. Petersburg Paradox. A game with infinite expected value, yet very low real-world value. It reveals something fragile in how we think about risk and reward. In theory, you could win millions, but in practice, the chance of getting there is so small it feels like nothing, and your brain knows it. The first few tosses, sure, you might get a decent payout, but the odds of reaching even $32 are slim. Beyond that, practically impossible. So even though the math says infinite value, your instincts say not worth it. And that's the paradox. It challenges the idea that expected value is the only thing that matters. That people are, or should be, perfectly rational calculators. We're not. We value certainty, proximity, emotion, risk tolerance. We want outcomes that feel real, not just outcomes that look good on paper. You see this in real life too. A business deal might promise huge profits, but the risk is too high, the wait too long, the chance too slim. A lottery ticket might offer millions, but you only buy it if the dream feels close enough to touch. The St. Petersburg Paradox reminds us, rational value isn't always human value. The mind isn't built to chase infinity. It's built to weigh risk, to crave balance, to reach for what feels possible. And in that, there's no failure, just understanding. You don't need to optimize everything. You don't need to pursue the biggest prize. Sometimes enough is enough. A coin toss, a few dollars, a quiet moment. Let the paradox be what it is. Endless on paper, but calm in your hands. And let that be your win. Monty Hall problem. A game show stage. Bright lights, 3 doors. Behind one, a brand new car. Behind the other 2, goats. You pick a door, say door 1. The host, Monty Hall, smiles. He knows what's behind all 3 doors. And now he opens one of the other 2, revealing a goat. Then he turns to you and says, "Would you like to switch your choice or stick with it?" At this point, 2 doors remain, so your instincts say it's 50-50, doesn't matter. But here's the twist, it does matter. And switching gives you double the chance of winning. This is the Monty Hall problem, a paradox that tricks your intuition, even when the math is clear. Let's break it down. When you first pick, there's a 1 in 3 chance you chose the car, and a 2 in 3 chance the car is behind one of the other doors. Monty, who always reveals a goat, opens one of those other 2. That action doesn't redistribute the odds. It just gives you more information. So, the 2 in 3 chance that the car was in the other 2 doors now sits entirely behind the one unopened door Monty didn't reveal. Switching doors shifts your odds from 1 in 3 to 2 in 3. And yet, most people stay. Why? Because it feels like nothing changed. Because it feels like Monty just got lucky. Because we trust our first instinct. Even when it's wrong. That's what makes the Monty Hall problem so quietly powerful. It's not about doors, it's about how easily we confuse new information with new odds. You've felt this. You invest in something early, then hesitate to pull out even when the data shifts. You stick with your first impression. Even after new facts emerge, you refuse to change lanes and traffic, just because you've already committed. The paradox isn't just mathematical, it's emotional. We struggle to let go of choices we've already made, even when switching gives us the better chance. And that's the insight. Rationality isn't just about making good choices. It's about being willing to change them. The Monty Hall problem shows us that what feels fair isn't always what is true, that sometimes staying the course feels safe, but moving wins. So let the doors stand still. Let the odds be clear. And if the moment asks you to change your mind, it's okay. Sometimes the wisest move is the one that turns away from your first guess. Galileo's paradox of infinity. Infinity. It sounds like something unreachable, something so vast it feels almost empty. But what if infinity could be compared? Measured? Matched against itself? That's exactly what Galileo's paradox of infinity tries to do. It starts simply with numbers. Take all the natural numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Now take all the perfect squares, 1, 4, 9, 16, 25. Obviously, there are fewer perfect squares, right? They get farther and farther apart as numbers grow. But now, pair each natural number to its square. 1 to 1, 2 to 4, 3 to 9, 4 to 16, 5, but geez, and so on. Every square has a natural number. Every natural number has a square. That means the set of natural numbers and the set of perfect squares are the same size, even though one is just a subset of the other. And here's the paradox. How can part of an infinite set be just as big as the whole? In the world of the finite, this would be absurd. Half of a pie is less than a whole. One shelf of books is less than the library. But in the world of the infinite, those rules collapse. Infinity doesn't behave, it doesn't shrink, it doesn't get smaller when you remove parts. This is Galileo's paradox, a contradiction that shows up. Not because something is wrong, but because our intuition breaks down at the edge of the infinite. You've seen this quietly. Every time you think, forever is longer than I can imagine. Every time you add one more second to forever and realize nothing changes. Every time you wonder how something can go on endlessly, yet still feel whole. Galileo's paradox teaches something gentle but profound. Infinity is not a number. It's not a place. It's not a bigger version of the biggest thing. It's a different kind of space, where logic folds but doesn't break, where subsets can be just as large as the total set, where size stops being size and becomes pattern. And in that shift, your thoughts soften. You stop trying to count the stars. You stop trying to measure the endless. You let the mind release its grip, because some things are not meant to be compared. Just felt, just observed, just allowed to stretch infinitely into quiet. Banach-Tarski paradox. Picture a smooth, perfect ball, solid, simple, whole. Now, imagine breaking it apart into a few pieces. Just 5. But these aren't ordinary pieces. They're not crumbs or shards. They're strange, fragmented, abstract, mathematical dust. Now, here's the paradox. You take those 5 pieces, and from them, reconstruct 2 identical balls, each the same size as the original, not a copy, not a scaled-down version. 2 full-size spheres, from one. This is the Banach-Tarski paradox, a result so bizarre, so unsettling, that even mathematicians once questioned whether it could be real. It's not a trick. It's not sleight of hand. It's a consequence of pure, rigorous logic, under very unusual rules. The paradox depends on infinite divisibility. It says, if you allow objects to be split into infinitely small, non-measurable parts, and you allow perfect rotation and movement, then the impossible becomes possible. 1 becomes 2. This isn't something you can do in the physical world. Atoms can't split like that. Mass doesn't multiply. But in the world of pure mathematics, shapes aren't limited by atoms. They're defined by sets, collections of points obeying abstract rules, and under those rules, you can break a shape apart and rearrange the pieces into something bigger than what you started with. The Banach-Tarski paradox reveals something startling. Infinity breaks our expectations of volume, size, and space. What we call whole and part loses meaning. You've felt that, in small ways. Time stretching and folding when you're lost in thought. A single memory feeling larger than a full day. A small moment carrying more meaning than a long conversation. Infinity doesn't just stretch space, it stretches understanding. And that's the point of the paradox. It's not about building 2 basketballs from one. It's about showing that even logic, cold, clean, exact, can lead to places that feel like magic. That the further you go into abstraction, the more reality begins to shimmer. And maybe that's not something to resist. Maybe it's something to rest in. Because the Banach-Tarski paradox doesn't want you to fix it. It just asks you to pause and let the strange possibility drift across your thoughts. 1 becomes 2. Wholeness divides. Logic dances at the edge of reason. And you get to stand still in the center of that quiet wonder. Hilbert's Hotel Paradox. Welcome to Hilbert's Hotel. A strange place. A place with infinite rooms. And, somehow, Every single room is already full. No vacancies, every guest accounted for. No end in sight. But now, a new guest arrives, and the receptionist says, "No problem, we have room." How? He asks the person in room 1 to move to room 2, room 2 to room 3, room 3 to room 4, and so on, forever. Suddenly, room 1 is empty, and the new guest moves in. Just like that. This is the Hilbert's Hotel Paradox, a thought experiment that challenges everything you think you know about size, fullness, and space. Now, imagine not one guest arrives, but an infinite number of new guests. Still not a problem. The receptionist tells every current guest to move to the room that's double their number. 1 goes to 2, 2 goes to 4, 3 goes to 6. Now, every odd-numbered room is free. Infinitely many, enough for all the new arrivals. The hotel was full. Then it took in more. Now it's full again, and that's the paradox. In the realm of the infinite, full doesn't mean full, and more doesn't always mean bigger. Hilbert's Hotel exposes the strange truth about infinity. It's not just endless, it's flexible. You can add to it, and it stays the same. You can subtract from it, and it stays the same. You can double it, and somehow, it's still just infinity. And this isn't fantasy, it's rigorous math. The paradox shows us that our everyday logic doesn't survive in the infinite. Words like more, less, complete, and empty begin to lose meaning. You've felt this in life. Trying to finish a task list that never ends. Filling a schedule until every moment feels packed, yet still finding ways to fit in something else. Your time feels full, yet you say yes to more. Hilbert's Hotel isn't just a curiosity, it's a mirror, a reminder that the infinite isn't chaos. It has structure. But that structure is not like the world we know. The paradox invites you to rest in that space, to stop trying to measure everything, to let go of the need to count, track, and control. Because infinity doesn't ask to be organized, it asks to be respected, and in that respect, you find peace, an endless hotel, a full house with infinite room, and a quiet place where your thoughts can wander freely without needing to arrive. Zeno's paradoxes. You take a step, then another, and slowly you move across the room. Simple, obvious, undeniable. But what if someone told you you never really got there? That, logically, your motion is an illusion. This is the strange world of Zeno's paradoxes. Born in ancient Greece, these thought experiments challenge the very idea of movement. They don't question your steps, they question what's hidden between them. Let's begin with one of the most famous, Achilles and the tortoise. Achilles, swift and strong, gives the tortoise a head start in a race. He begins to chase, but Zeno says he'll never catch up. Why? Because to reach where the tortoise started, Achilles must first cover that distance, but by the time he gets there, the tortoise has moved forward a bit more. And by the time he reaches that point, the tortoise has moved again, over and over, endlessly, each gap smaller than the last, but never quite zero, so Achilles keeps chasing, forever close, never caught. It's absurd, we've all passed someone slower. But the logic? It traps you in infinite steps within a finite space. Now, the arrow paradox. An arrow flies through the air, but Zeno freezes time. He says, at every single instant, the arrow is still, occupying a single space, motionless. And if at every instant it's not moving, when does the movement happen? Each moment is still, yet the arrow moves. Another loop, another contradiction. Then there's the dichotomy paradox. To get anywhere, you must first go halfway. But to reach halfway, you must reach a quarter, and before that, a 16th, an 8th, a 64th, an infinite number of steps. So, how can you ever begin? Zeno's paradoxes are not physics, they are puzzles, ones that poke at the cracks between space, time, and perception. We now know that infinity can converge, that an infinite number of shrinking distances can add up to a finite length. Calculus resolved what logic could only chase. But Zeno's questions still linger, because he wasn't just asking about motion. He was asking about how we understand the world. One frozen moment at a time, you feel this paradox when time slows, waiting for a message, watching a clock. Each second feels frozen, still. Yet somehow, you arrive at the hour. You experience it when change creeps in. So gradually, it's invisible, until suddenly, everything is different. Zeno reminds us, the world moves not in leaps, but in accumulation. Tiny steps, tiny pauses, tiny moments that build something real. So when you feel stuck, between here and there, between thought and action, let his paradox carry you. Not to confusion, but to peace. Because even if the steps are infinite, you are already moving. Infinite monkey theorem. A room, a typewriter, and a monkey, randomly pressing keys. Nothing planned, no meaning, just chaos. Now imagine, the monkey never stops, not for a minute, not for eternity. And here's the paradox. Given infinite time, that monkey will eventually type out the complete works of Shakespeare. Every sonnet, every scene, every comma in the right place. This is the infinite monkey theorem, a thought experiment about infinity, chance, and structure hidden in randomness. At first, it sounds ridiculous. A monkey producing literature? But it's not about monkeys, it's about probability, and what happens when you stretch time so far that the improbable becomes inevitable. You see, in an infinite sequence of random letters, every possible combination will eventually appear. Not just Shakespeare, but your name, your memories, this very sentence. Somewhere in that endless noise is order. That's what makes the paradox so strange. It says even randomness, when given enough time, creates meaning. But here's the twist. The chances of it happening within any realistic time frame are basically zero. The universe could burn out long before it ever types to be or not to be. So the paradox doesn't promise results. It promises possibility, only in the context of forever. And in that forever, everything becomes possible, even the impossible. You've felt this quietly, a perfect coincidence, a moment so improbable it makes you pause. You think, what are the odds? And yet, it happened. Or a random thought connects to something meaningful. A pattern appears in the noise. And for a second, you wonder if it was random at all. The infinite monkey theorem whispers, maybe meaning doesn't require intention. Maybe the universe doesn't have to plan for beauty to emerge. It's unsettling and also comforting, because it means the chaos around you, and sometimes the chaos within, still carries the potential for something beautiful. Not by force, not by control, but by possibility. So, let the monkey type. Let the keys clack endlessly. Because somewhere in that noise is a sentence that could change everything. or nothing. Either way, it's all part of the infinite. Arrow's impossibility theorem. Imagine a group of people, each with their own preferences, each casting votes for what they want. Now you try to take all of those individual rankings and build a single, fair group decision. No tricks, no biases, no voices ignored. Seems simple. But then the paradox arrives. This is Arrow's impossibility theorem, a quiet storm at the heart of the voting theory. It begins with a dream. Create a perfect voting system, one that takes everyone's preferences and produces a result that represents the will of the group. To do this fairly, you'd want just a few basic things. Universality. The system should handle any combination of preferences. Non-dictatorship. No single person should always get their way. Pareto efficiency. If everyone prefers A over B, the group should too. Independence of irrelevant alternatives. The group's ranking between A and B shouldn't change because of a third, unrelated option. Each rule feels obvious, reasonable, necessary. But Arrow proved something unsettling. It's impossible to satisfy all of them at once. No matter how you design the system, one of those rules breaks, always. That's the paradox. Even in a democracy, perfect fairness can't be mathematically guaranteed. The very act of combining personal preferences into a single group choice creates distortions. You've seen it. In elections where a third candidate changes the outcome, not by winning, but by pulling votes from someone else. In group decisions where one person's intense preference overwhelms everyone else's mild agreement. In committees, teams, and boards, where compromise becomes conflict, because priorities collide. Arrow's theorem doesn't say democracy is broken, it says it's complex, messy, human. And in that complexity, you learn something profound. No system is perfect. Every rule has a cost. Every solution comes with a shadow. But maybe the goal isn't perfection. Maybe it's awareness, to know that even fair systems have limits, to approach decision-making not with blind trust, but with thoughtful care. Arrow didn't destroy voting. He just reminded us to be humble with it, to remember that even the best designs are built on trade-offs. So let the paradox rest, not as a failure, but as a mirror. Fairness isn't an endpoint, it's a practice, a question we ask again and again, even when the answers don't come clean. Benford's Law Paradox. Open a newspaper, scan the numbers. City populations, electric bills, stock prices, length of rivers, measurements from science. You might expect the first digits of those numbers, 1 through 9, to appear randomly. Each digit should show up about the same, right? But they don't. Instead, something strange happens. The number 1 shows up as the first digit more than 30% of the time. The number 2 comes next most often, and the number 9 barely 5%. This isn't a fluke. It happens across datasets, industries, countries, centuries, over and over again. This is the Benford's Law Paradox, a law that seems to defy common sense. You'd think first digits should be evenly spread. But the real world, when measured in certain ways, doesn't behave evenly, and yet it behaves predictably. Benford's law says, in many naturally occurring datasets, the smaller digits dominate the first place position. 1 is most common, then 2, then 3, all the way down. It doesn't matter the units, dollars, miles, grams. The pattern still emerges. Why? Because of scale and variance. When numbers grow across multiple magnitudes, like from 1 to 1 million, they spend more time starting with 1 than any other digit. Going from 1 to 2 takes a 100% increase. Going from 8 to 9, just 12.5%. So numbers in growing systems naturally cluster at the lower end of each power of 10. Still, it feels like a cheat, like a trick of perception. But it's not, it's math, and it's useful. Auditors use Benford's law to detect fraud. If the digits in a company's books don't follow this pattern, something might be wrong. Because when people make up numbers, they assume even distribution. But nature doesn't. The Benford paradox reveals something quiet but powerful. Randomness isn't always random. Patterns hide in places we least expect. You've seen this elsewhere. The rhythm of traffic, the frequency of earthquake magnitudes, the spread of wealth. Not smooth, not fair, but predictably uneven. And maybe that's the deeper message. That the world leans toward certain shapes, certain patterns, certain curves. And in seeing those shapes, you begin to let go of the illusion of evenness. You stop expecting balance and start looking for rhythm. So let the paradox settle. Let the ones come more often. Let the nines drift quietly behind. And let your mind rest in the asymmetry. Not broken, not wrong, just real. Lottery paradox. You enter a lottery. Millions of tickets. Only one winner. You hold your ticket and think, it won't be me. You're not being pessimistic. You're being rational. With odds like this, the chance that your ticket wins is nearly zero, so you assume, like everyone else, that yours is a losing ticket. Now imagine asking each person the same question. Will your ticket win? Almost all will say no. Logically, rationally, reasonably. But here's the twist. Someone will win. This is the lottery paradox. It exposes the strange contradiction between individual reasoning and collective truth. Each person is justified in believing they'll lose. But when everyone holds that belief, they can't all be right. Only one ticket wins. So at least one person's belief, though reasonable, must be wrong. That's the paradox. It reveals a flaw in the way we build beliefs. You take a small, solid assumption. My ticket probably won't win. Multiply it across a group. Everyone's ticket probably won't win. Then ask, can they all be right? Number. Because someone's ticket will win, their belief was wrong, even though it was the most reasonable thing to believe. So, now the deeper question, is it possible to be perfectly rational and still wrong? Yes, because probability doesn't guarantee outcomes. It only frames them. You've felt this. You assume something won't happen, and then it does. You dismiss a chance, only to watch it play out. You walk past a moment thinking it's nothing, until it becomes everything. The lottery paradox whispers, rational doubt is not the same as truth. You can doubt something, calculate the odds, do the math, and still end up surprised. And that's not failure, that's the nature of uncertainty. Even the most logical mind must make room for the improbable. So, when life presents you with long odds, a rare opportunity, a strange coincidence, a tiny hope, you don't have to expect it, but you also don't have to dismiss it. Because somewhere in the crowd of doubt, one belief is quietly correct, and that belief may not look any different until after the numbers are drawn. So, let the paradox rest in your thoughts. Let probability be what it is, and let possibility remain, even when it feels foolish. Because once in a while, the unlikely happens, and it changes everything. Sleeping Beauty problem, a quiet room, a gentle sleep, and a strange experiment. This is the Sleeping Beauty problem. A paradox of probability, memory, and self-awareness. Here's how it works. On Sunday, Sleeping Beauty is told the rules. A fair coin will be flipped. If the coin lands heads, she'll be woken up once on Monday. Then the experiment ends. If the coin lands tails, she'll be woken up twice, once on Monday and again on Tuesday. But after Monday's waking, her memory will be erased. She won't remember it happened. So each time she wakes, she doesn't know what day it is. She doesn't know how the coin landed. She just knows she's awake. And now the question. When she wakes up, what is the probability the coin landed heads? At first glance, the answer feels obvious. The coin is fair. So it should still be 50-50. But then the paradox slips in. Over time, she'll wake up twice as often if the coin is tails. 1 wake up if heads, 2 if tails. So from her perspective, waking up at all is twice as likely under tails. Some say this means the chance is 1 in 3 that the coin was heads. Others insist it must still be 1 in 2. The disagreement cuts deep. Even among philosophers, mathematicians, and logicians, and it reveals a deeper tension. What matters more in probability? Objective chances or subjective experience? Do you calculate based on the experiment's design, or based on how often a situation like this one will occur? The Sleeping Beauty problem isn't about dreaming. It's about perspective, about what it means to be uncertain in a moment that's been carefully shaped. You've felt this, waking up and forgetting what day it is, unsure if a memory was real or imagined, trying to make a decision while knowing your view is limited, biased, incomplete. The paradox reminds us, even when you know the rules, your experience might not match the truth. And that's not failure, it's part of being conscious. To wake up in uncertainty, to question what you think you know, to recognize that your point of view is only one slice of a bigger story. Sleeping Beauty doesn't know if it's Monday or Tuesday, but she knows enough to ask the right question. And maybe that's the lesson. Not to always demand certainty, but to learn how to sit in the unknown. To know that sometimes the most honest answer is, I'm not sure. And in that not knowing, there's peace. Doomsday, argument. You're alive, right now. A thinking, breathing person, part of the great human story. And someone asks you, what does your place in history say about the end of humanity? At first, the question feels strange. You're just one person, one moment. But the doomsday argument says your moment, your position in the timeline, might actually be a clue. A quiet, unsettling clue about how much future is left. Here's how the reasoning goes. If you assume you're randomly born into the human story, then it's more likely you're somewhere in the middle of it. Not right at the start, not near the end, but somewhere typical. Now imagine humanity has only produced 100 billion people total, and you're among the first 100 million. That would place you in the very early chapters of the story. Statistically, that's unlikely. But if your person numbers 60 billion or 80 billion, then you're closer to the middle. More probable, more expected. So the argument goes, if we were very early in the timeline, that would be rare. So it's more likely we're closer to the end. From this logic, some have estimated that humanity might not continue for millions of years, but for just a few thousand more. And that's the paradox. Can your place in history predict how much future remains? It feels arrogant, or maybe deeply humble. And yet, the numbers tug. The doomsday argument doesn't rely on environmental data, war, disease, or policy. It's purely probabilistic. A quiet thought experiment built from anthropic reasoning, using your existence right now as data. Of course, not everyone agrees with its conclusion. Critics say the reasoning is flawed, that we can't treat ourselves as random samples, that history isn't a lottery, that progress, intelligence, or randomness could skew the view. But that's what makes it a paradox. It balances on a line between rational probability and philosophical discomfort. You've felt it in other ways, looking at a long line of people, trying to guess how close you are to the front, being part of a movement, wondering if you're at the beginning or the final breath. The doomsday argument is not a prediction. It's a mirror, a reminder that every now and then we try to make sense of the vastness of time from our single, fragile point within it. And whether we're early or late, first or last, we're still here, now, which may be the only moment we truly get to hold. So, let the paradox rest. Let the uncertainty be still. Not a fear, just a possibility. And in that stillness, there's room to live fully, even at the edge of time. Birthday paradox. You walk into a room with a few people, 10, maybe 15. Someone mentions birthdays, and someone else says, "I bet 2 of us share the same one." You laugh. It seems unlikely. There are 365 days in a year. Surely, you need way more people for that to happen. But here's the twist. With just 23 people in a room, there's over a 50% chance that 2 of them share a birthday. With 57 people, it jumps to 99%. This is the birthday paradox, not a contradiction, but a collision between intuition and probability. You assume the odds are low, because you're thinking about your birthday matching someone else's. And yes, that has a low probability. But the real question is different. What are the odds that any 2 people in the room share a birthday? That's not one comparison, it's many. In a group of 23 people, there are 253 unique pairs, each one a chance for a match. Suddenly, the odds aren't so small. The birthday paradox reveals how easily our minds misjudge probability, especially when multiple interactions are involved. You've felt this without noticing. A coincidence that feels impossible. Running into a stranger who shares your hometown. Meeting 2 people with the same name on the same day. It feels uncanny, rare. But mathematically, it's not. The more people, the more connections. The more connections, the higher the odds, even when it doesn't feel that way. This paradox doesn't break the rules. It exposes the limits of human intuition. We think in lines. Probability moves in webs. We focus on what seems obvious, but forget to count the hidden comparisons beneath the surface. And that's where the surprise lives. Not in one moment, but in the quiet accumulation of possibilities. The birthday paradox teaches us to look again, to question the gut feeling, to slow down and ask, how many paths am I ignoring? Because the world is full of intersections we never notice, until suddenly they overlap. 2 people, same day, and a moment that feels magical, because we never saw it coming. Let that reminder soften your expectations. What seems unlikely may be closer than you think. Condorcet's paradox. 3 people, 3 choices, 1 vote. You'd think the outcome would be clear, that majority rule would settle everything, that democracy is, at its core, fair and rational. But then, something odd happens. Person A prefers option X over Y and Y over Z. Person B prefers Y over Z and Z over X. Person C prefers Z over X and X over Y. Now, line up the votes. Between X and Y, A and C choose X. Between Y and Z, A and B choose Y. Between Z and X, B and C choose Z. And now, the paradox emerges. X beats Y. Y beats Z. Z beats X. Each option is preferred over another, but the cycle never ends. This is Condorcet's paradox, a loop buried deep within the structure of majority voting. It's not a mistake, it's not manipulation. It's what happens when individual preferences combine into collective decisions, and that combination can defy logic. It shows us that even when each person is rational, the group as a whole can become irrational. That majority rule doesn't always produce consistency. The group wants X over Y, Y over Z, but also Z over X. A cycle, a loop, a vote that can spin endlessly. You've seen this in real life, when 3 departments argue over a budget. Each prefers their own plan, but their second choices circle back in contradiction. In elections with multiple candidates, where ranking systems flip outcomes depending on who's compared first. Or in teams, where every decision seems to please 2 and frustrate 1, but the frustration rotates endlessly. The Condorcet paradox reveals a deep truth. Group decision-making is fragile. Even fair, honest votes can lead to outcomes that can't be ranked. It's not about corruption, it's about complexity. And it's a reminder that democracy, for all its strength, requires more than just counting votes. It requires understanding how preferences interact, how majority isn't always decisive, and how cycles can form without anyone meaning to create them. The paradox doesn't say abandon voting, it says be aware of the limits. That even when every individual voice is clear, the chorus might still sing in circles. And once you see that, you stop chasing perfect systems. You start listening more closely. You look for where the loop begins, and where understanding can gently break it. So let the vote settle, let the cycle pause, let the decision breathe even if it never truly lands. Because sometimes the wisdom isn't in choosing, it's in noticing the pattern and resting in the space between. Friendship paradox. You scroll through your social feed, you see smiling faces, exciting updates, crowded rooms, and somewhere deep inside you think everyone else seems more connected than I am. It's a quiet ache, but statistically, you might be right. This is the friendship paradox, a strange mathematical truth that says, on average, your friends have more friends than you do. Not because you're unpopular, not because you've done something wrong, but because the structure of social networks makes it that way. Here's how. Highly connected people, those with lots of friends, appear in more people's friend circles. They're overrepresented. So when you look at your list of friends, you're more likely to be seeing people who are more social than average. It's not that everyone is more popular. It's that the people you see most often statistically are. It's a mathematical illusion. But it doesn't feel like one. Because the mind doesn't measure networks. It feels absence. It compares quietly. It counts the invitations that didn't come, the texts left unread, the gatherings you didn't attend. The friendship paradox shows how average perception can distort emotional reality. You think, if I feel alone and everyone else looks fine, then maybe I'm the only one. But they're thinking that too. Because their feeds show the same thing: crowds, connections, carefully curated joy. And the paradox multiplies. More than just numbers, it becomes a mirror of quiet doubt. But the truth is softer. Your worth isn't measured by connection count. Your meaning isn't found in algorithms. The paradox isn't telling you to be more social. It's telling you, don't mistake the reflection for reality. Social networks, digital or real, are built in uneven ways. and those imbalances can trick the heart. So when you feel like you're falling behind, like others are more loved, more seen, more surrounded, remember this: that feeling, mathematically predictable, emotionally powerful, and deeply misleading. You're not missing something, you're just standing in a shadow cast by how connection flows. And when you let that realization settle, you stop chasing the crowd. You start cherishing the circle, however small, that knows you truly. Because presence isn't about number, it's about depth. Paradox of hedonism: you want to be happy, of course you do, so you chase it. Pleasure, comfort, joy, satisfaction, you seek what feels good, moments that sparkle, taste sweet, feel warm, but then something strange happens. The more you chase happiness directly, the further away it feels. This is the paradox of hedonism. It says, if happiness becomes your main goal, you may never actually find it, because the act of wanting it gets in the way of feeling it. Pleasure is real. Joy is real. But when you start aiming at them like a target, they begin to shift, to float just out of reach. You've felt it, the vacation that didn't feel relaxing, because you were trying too hard to relax. The party that felt flat, because you expected it to be perfect. The gift you gave yourself, that didn't feel like a reward. It's not that pleasure fails, it's that making pleasure the point turns the experience into a transaction. You think, if I do this, I'll be happy. But now your joy is conditional, calculated, measured. And joy doesn't like to be measured. The paradox of hedonism teaches us happiness is a byproduct, not a destination. It shows up when you're not trying to summon it, when you're doing something else. Something meaningful, something you care about for its own sake. You don't find joy by staring at it, you find it by forgetting yourself for a moment, helping someone, laughing at something unexpected, creating, learning, loving. Happiness sneaks in sideways, like sunlight through curtains, like a melody that catches you off guard. And when you try too hard to bottle it, it slips. So what does this paradox ask of you? Not to give up pleasure, but to stop chasing it like a prize, to live in ways that matter, to pursue meaning, not mood, to allow happiness to happen instead of forcing it to arrive. Let the paradox settle, not as denial, but as freedom. The less you grip joy, the more it finds you. Quietly, kindly, exactly when you're not looking. Paradox of tragedy. You sit in a dark theater. The lights dim, the curtain lifts, and before you know it, you're watching heartbreak unfold. A mother loses her child. A hero falls. A betrayal cuts deep. A goodbye lasts forever. You watch it happen, eyes wide, heart aching, tears rising. But then something even stranger happens. You feel moved, not shattered, not ruined, but deeply alive. This is the paradox of tragedy. It asks a haunting question. Why do we find pleasure in stories of pain? Why are we drawn to suffering? We wouldn't wish on anyone. The contradiction is simple. We avoid pain in life, but seek it out in art. We don't want to be hurt, but we'll stand in line to feel the echo of someone else's hurt. It's not sadism, it's not detachment, it's something deeper. The paradox of tragedy tells us there's beauty in sorrow when it's not ours, because tragedy in story gives pain shape. It frames it, contains it, gives it beginning, middle, and end. And in doing so, it helps us face what we avoid. You cry for the character, but also for yourself, for what you've lost, for what you fear, for what you've never dared to name. Art gives that sadness permission. It lets you feel without consequences, without risk, without needing to explain. And in that safe ache, you find something rare: catharsis, the release of emotion, through the empathy of witnessing. You grieve something you didn't lose, but somehow it helps heal something you did. You felt this before. The sad song on repeat, the movie that shatters you softly, the book that leaves your chest hollow and full at the same time. The paradox of tragedy shows us that sorrow isn't just to be avoided. It can be transformed, held, understood, and when it's shared, it connects. You see your pain in someone else's story, and suddenly you feel less alone. So let the curtain fall, let the sadness swell, let the tears come without shame. Because tragedy, when wrapped in story, becomes something more than pain. It becomes meaning, it becomes memory, it becomes a moment where hearts beat in unison. And sometimes that's the most beautiful feeling of all. Paradox of fiction. You know it's not real, the world, the characters, the crisis they face, the emotions they express, and yet your chest tightens. Your throat catches. You feel sorrow, fear, even joy for someone who never existed. You cry when they die. You cheer when they win. You hold your breath through their battles. This is the paradox of fiction. It asks a quietly unsettling question. How can we feel real emotions for things we know are not real? You're not confused. You don't think the hero in the movie is truly in danger. You know the story was written, crafted, controlled, and yet you react as if it's happening. Why? That's the paradox. Logic says emotion should follow belief. We're supposed to feel only for what's real, but experience says otherwise. The moment the music swells, the dialogue breaks, the scene lingers. You're in it, fully. Even when your mind whispers, "This is fiction." The paradox of fiction reveals something essential. Our emotions aren't bound to reality. They respond to meaning, to connection, to empathy. You can care about someone you've never met, because the story let you understand them. You can grieve a fictional loss, because the pain it reflects is deeply human. And that's the key. Fiction isn't fake. It's a mirror. It reflects real things through unreal lenses. We cry at a film not because it's factual, but because it touches something we've lived. A heartbreak we've felt. A fear we carry. A hope we still hold. You've seen this in yourself. You miss a character when the book ends. You quote lines that feel like memories. You imagine how their story might have continued. And none of that makes you naive. It makes you capable of imagination, of belief, of emotion without boundaries. The paradox doesn't ask you to stop feeling. It reminds you how beautifully flexible you are, that your mind can hold truth and fiction side by side, that your heart can reach toward a shadow and still feel warmth. So let the stories move you. Let the characters matter. Let the fiction become real, if only for a moment, because in that moment you're not pretending, you're connecting. And in a world full of uncertainty, that connection, however imaginary, can still be real. Paradox of free will. You make a choice. Maybe small, maybe life-changing. You choose what to eat, where to go, what to believe, who to love, what to become, and deep inside, you feel it. That was my decision. No one forced it. I chose it. But then, you pause. Because the past shaped you. Your upbringing, your biology, the culture you live in, the brain you didn't build, the thoughts that appear before you invite them. And now the question: if every thought, every decision, is caused by something before it. Are you truly free? This is the paradox of free will, a conflict between what we feel, that we are free agents, and what logic and science suggest, that everything, including your thoughts, may be part of a long, unbroken chain of cause and effect. If your choices were determined by neurons, firing based on genetics and environment, then where are you in all of it? And yet, you feel free. Every day, you hesitate, you weigh options, you regret, you change your mind. These are not things that rocks do, not things machines do, at least not in the same way. So, how can both things be true? How can you feel free and still be part of a determined system? Some say free will is an illusion, a trick of consciousness. Others say it's real, but not absolute, more like a dance between freedom and influence. But the paradox doesn't need to be solved to be understood. It simply shines a light on what it means to be human. Because even if every decision has causes, even if your mind is shaped by things beyond your control, you still experience choice. And experience matters. You feel guilt. You feel pride. You feel responsibility. You don't assign those things to falling leaves or to tides. You assign them to people because we are more than predictable. We respond. We reflect. We resist. Maybe the paradox of free will doesn't need an answer. Maybe it just needs your attention to help you live more consciously, more thoughtfully, knowing your choices carry weight, even if their roots run deep. And that, paradox or not, you are the one who must still decide. So let that be enough. Let freedom be real in how you live it, not how you define it. Paradox of democracy. The principle is simple. Power belongs to the people. Every voice counts. Every vote matters. Democracy is supposed to be the system that guards against tyranny, that keeps rulers accountable, that reflects the will of the many. But then, the paradox appears. What if the majority chooses a leader who, once in power, begins to dismantle the very democracy that elected them? What if people use their freedom to vote it away? This is the paradox of democracy. It reveals the unsettling truth that a system built on freedom can be used through entirely legal means to destroy freedom itself. A society can democratically elect someone who restricts the press, silences critics, erodes checks and balances, or changes laws to stay in power. And the system, designed to serve the people, becomes a weapon against them. All by their own hand. It's a contradiction rooted in trust. Democracy assumes that when people are free to choose, they'll choose leaders who protect that freedom. But history has shown that's not always what happens. Sometimes fear takes over. Sometimes anger wins. Sometimes a promise of order or strength feels more appealing than the slow, uncertain work of cooperation. And that's where democracy folds in on itself. The paradox of democracy asks, should a free society allow people to vote for their own oppression? And if not, is it still truly free? It's a quiet, unsettling loop, because protecting democracy may sometimes require limiting its scope. But limiting its scope might begin the same process of erosion you were trying to prevent. You've seen it play out. Leaders who rise by votes, then stay by force. People who beg for safety, only to lose their voice. The paradox isn't about politics, it's about the fragility of systems that depend on wisdom and patience from the crowd. And the truth is, crowds can be impatient, even irrational. democracy is beautiful, but it isn't self-sustaining. It needs more than votes. It needs vigilance, civic memory, institutions that don't bend too easily, and people who know that freedom is a responsibility, not just a right. The paradox of democracy reminds us that what protects us can also be used against us, that no system is immune from collapse if its foundations are forgotten. So, let the paradox stay with you, not as a warning to fear freedom, but as a call to defend it, carefully, consciously, together. Paradox of self-deception. You tell yourself something, a belief, a story, a quiet lie, and somehow you believe it. Not because it's true, not because you're unaware, but because, on some level, you need it. This is the paradox of self-deception. It asks, how can you deceive yourself and still believe the lie? To lie to someone, you have to know the truth and hide it. But if you're the liar and you're the one being lied to, how does it work? How can you hold the truth in one hand and believe the opposite with the other? It's a contradiction, a loop, a fragile trick the mind plays on itself. And yet you've done it. We all have. You convince yourself someone loves you, when deep down, you feel the distance. You insist you're fine when your body says otherwise. You stay in something a job, a habit, a relationship, because telling the truth would demand too much change. So you hide the truth from the part of you that could act on it. Not with words, but with silence, with distraction, with just enough denial to keep the peace. The paradox of self-deception isn't about being foolish. It's about being fragile. It's about survival. Sometimes you lie to yourself not out of malice, but out of mercy, because the truth, when it first arrives, can hurt more than you are ready to feel. And the mind, in its strange brilliance, gives you time. It lets the truth in slowly, layer by layer, until you're strong enough to hold it. That's the quiet gift of this paradox. Yes, it's a contradiction, but it's also a strategy. It says, let me believe this, just long enough to keep going. And when the time is right, the truth knocks again, softer, more familiar. And this time you open the door. So, the paradox of self-deception doesn't shame you. It simply invites you to notice. Where are you whispering things to yourself that you wouldn't say out loud? Where are you holding two truths and calling one of them invisible? And when you're ready, you can stop pretending. Not all at once, not with force, but gently, because truth, when welcomed slowly, becomes a kind of freedom. Paradox of surprise. Your teacher makes an announcement. There will be a surprise test next week. You won't know which day, but it's coming. And immediately, your mind begins to calculate. If it happens on Friday, you'll expect it by Thursday night. So Friday can't be a surprise. If Friday's ruled out, then Thursday becomes the last possible option. So now Thursday can't be a surprise either. Keep thinking this way, and by the time you're done, you've eliminated every day. The test can't happen on Wednesday, not on Tuesday, not even Monday. You've reasoned your way into certainty that the surprise can't happen at all, and then, on Wednesday morning, the test arrives. You're shocked, surprised, exactly as promised. This is the paradox of surprise, also known as the unexpected hanging paradox. It's a riddle built from logic, but designed to defeat logic. Your reasoning seems airtight. You eliminate all the options one by one with perfect deduction, and yet, your conclusion fails. Because the moment the surprise arrives, it undoes the reasoning that tried to eliminate it. It's not just a game, it's a mirror. It shows us that sometimes the very act of trying to predict something changes the thing you're trying to predict. Surprise only works when you let go of needing control. You've felt this, waiting for a phone call, expecting a result, telling yourself, if I think through every outcome, I won't be caught off guard. But still, you're surprised. Not because you weren't smart, but because some things resist prediction by their nature. The paradox whispers, you can't fully prepare for the unexpected without making it expected. And that's the trap. The more you try to outthink surprise, the more you push it into non-existence. And yet, life finds a way to surprise you anyway. A moment you didn't see coming. A feeling you didn't expect. A truth that lands before you are ready. The paradox of surprise teaches this. Sometimes the unknown isn't meant to be solved. It's meant to be felt. Not feared, not calculated, just experienced. So let the need for perfect foresight rest. Let the test come. Let the day unfold without defense. Because surprise, when welcomed, becomes wonder. Paradox of power. Power is strength, control, the ability to act, to decide, to bend the world in your favor. It's what empires chase, what leaders hold, what people fear, and sometimes worship. But here's the twist. The more power you have, the more you depend on those without it. This is the paradox of power. It says, real power often makes you more vulnerable, not less. A ruler may control an army, but only as long as the soldiers obey. A CEO may lead a company, but only if the employees keep working and the customers keep buying. A parent may have authority, but they depend on the child's trust to make that authority meaningful. The moment the people stop cooperating, the power dissolves. So what seems like control from the outside is often built on layers of dependence underneath. That's the paradox. Power appears absolute, but it's quietly shared. And the more forcefully someone clings to it, the more fragile it becomes. You've seen it. Leaders who lose touch thinking power is permanent, only to watch it slip through their fingers. When support fades, people who dominate others, only to find they're now trapped by the need to keep controlling, because power invites resistance, and the more you hold on to it, the more you must work to defend it. That defense becomes the burden. The paradox of power reveals a truth. True strength isn't control, it's influence, and influence is voluntary. It's built on trust, not fear, on connection, not intimidation. The more someone tries to enforce power, the more they reveal their fear of losing it. And the ones who don't need to force it often hold it more securely. You feel this in your own life. Moments where letting go earned you more respect than holding tight. Moments where listening brought more authority than speaking louder. Because power, when used wisely, creates space, lifts others, extends itself, and when it becomes a weapon, it shrinks. So let the paradox rest in your mind. Real power is not about being untouchable, it's about being rooted in something deeper than fear. Let that kind of strength guide you, the kind that doesn't have to shout, the kind that doesn't have to prove anything, the kind that lasts. Knowledge paradox. You learn something new, a fact, a concept, a truth you didn't know before. It feels like progress, like clarity, like the world just got smaller, simpler, more understandable. But then, something shifts. What you learn opens a new question, and that question leads to 3 more, and those lead to 10. And now the world feels bigger than when you began. This is the knowledge paradox that says, the more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know. Every answer deepens the mystery. Every discovery exposes new blind spots. Every step forward expands the horizon. It's not a failure, it's the design. Knowledge isn't a staircase, it's a spiral. And the further you climb, the more you become aware of how far you have left to go. You've felt this. You start reading about something simple, a historical event, a scientific theory, a social issue, and suddenly you're lost in complexity. Different perspectives, contradicting data, words you didn't know existed. The deeper you go, the less sure you feel. That's the paradox. Learning doesn't always bring certainty. Sometimes it brings humility. Because real knowledge doesn't fill your cup. It makes you realize how vast the ocean is. Socrates once said, "I know that I know nothing," not as a joke, as wisdom. Because the wise aren't the ones who know the most. They're the ones who know what they don't know. The knowledge. Paradox doesn't discourage learning. It reveals its shape. It says, true knowledge includes doubt, not paralyzing doubt, but the kind that keeps you open, curious, grounded. You don't have to master everything, you just have to keep learning. Not to feel superior, but to grow smaller in your ego, and wider in your understanding. So, let the paradox calm you. You'll never know it all. And that's not a flaw, that's freedom. Because wonder lives not in the answers, but in the questions that remain. Moral luck. Paradox. 2 people, 2 choices, same intention. One takes the risk and nothing goes wrong. The other does the exact same thing. But tragedy follows. One walks away unchanged, the other carries blame for life. This is the moral luck paradox. It asks a quietly disturbing question. Should someone be judged for what happened, even when the outcome was shaped by pure chance? You see it in everyday life. 2 drivers choose to text at a red light. Both look away for 3 seconds. One looks up and drives on. The other looks up and hits a child crossing the road. One is careless. The other is careless and guilty. But is the difference really moral? Or is it circumstance? Moral luck challenges our most basic ideas about justice, about responsibility, about what makes someone good or bad. It says our judgments are shaped not only by choices, but by outcomes we can't fully control. And that makes things uncomfortable, because we want morality to be clean. A choice is either right or wrong. You either meant harm or you didn't. But life isn't that neat. You've felt this. You try to do the right thing, and it backfires. You make a mistake and get away with it. And sometimes you feel guilty. For being lucky, that's moral luck. It divides people not by character, but by result. And the deeper question becomes, can we ever judge fairly when so much of what happens is out of our hands? Some say we should judge only intentions, because outcomes are unpredictable. Others say outcomes matter, because that's what affects real people. Both views make sense, and both lead to contradictions. That's what makes it a paradox. You want accountability, but you also want compassion. You want justice, but you also want grace. The moral. Luck paradox doesn't offer a rule book. It holds up a mirror. to how quick we are to praise the successful, and how harsh we are with the unlucky. It reminds us that being right isn't always a reflection of being good, and being wrong isn't always a sign of bad intent. So let the paradox teach you to pause. Before you judge, before you shame, before you label, because in a world full of chance, the line between hero and villain is often drawn by luck. And the deeper wisdom is learning to hold that truth without losing your sense of right and wrong. Let that complexity breathe, not to excuse, but to understand.